Good morning. Good morning, Ambassador.
Morning, good morning.
Morning. Morning, Anita. How are you?
Good morning, Ali. How are you?
Thank you.
Good morning, Chair. Good to see you. Morning, Anita.
Good morning, Osa. How are you doing?
I'm fine, thanks.
Hello, everybody.
Oh, there's Edie.
Good morning. Good morning, Edie.
Good morning.
Good morning to all colleagues.
Morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Good morning.
Very good morning, Jean-Luc.
Bonjour, Finda. Ça va?
Yes, ça va. Il y a un problème avec
Non, l'ambassadeur est là.
yes, Angola. Yeah, is having
Oh.
problem.
Bonjour,
Oh.
maintenant je suis là. Bonjour, merci.
Oh, okay, good. Bonjour.
Merci.
Bonjour.
Merci.
Bonjour, Madame l'ambassadeur. Bienvenue.
Merci.
Merci.
Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning, Edie. How are you?
Good. Happy New Year to all of you.
Oh, Ambassador World, how are you?
Very good. How are you? Nice
Hi.
to see you.
Good
Nice
to see you.
all of you.
We
Happy New
missed-
Year.
We missed you in the bureau meeting, Ambassador.
Thank you.
So, Mr. President, we are still delegation coming in, so I would suggest that we start in 3 minutes. Would that work, Mr. President?
Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you. I would like also to welcome the executive director of UNAIDS, Winnie Mariana, who is connected. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you. Delighted to be here.
Good morning, Winnie. Good to see you.
Good morning.
I look forward to our discussion.
Me too.
Thanks for being with us.
Mr. President, we can start whenever you are ready.
Morning, Excellencies and distinguished delegates. It's my pleasure to declare open this year's first regular session 2021 of the UN Women Executive Board. Please allow me to acknowledge and welcome among us Madame Mfuzile Lambo-Buke, the Secretary General and Executive Director of UN Women. I also welcome to the virtual podium the following UN Women colleagues: Esther Rainier, Deputy Executive Director for Normative Support and Program Results; Anita Bachir, Deputy Executive Director for Resource Management, UN Systems Coordination, Sustainability and Partnership; and Jean-Luc Boris, who is Secretary of the Executive Board. Thank you so much for joining us. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, let me, on behalf of my colleague board members, welcome you all to the first regular session of UN Women Executive Board for 2021. I am indeed very grateful for the opportunity and honor to serve as President of UN Women Executive Board for 2021. Please allow me to acknowledge my predecessor, colleague and friend, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of Finland to the UN, His Excellency Ambassador Mr. Jukas Lovara, and the Vice Presidents, as well as the Executive Director and the entire dedicated team of UN Women for their sustained commitment to duty throughout 2020, despite the brazen global challenges that unfolded before our own very eyes. I would like to express deep appreciation in highlighting the work of the board in ensuring full business continuity. And I applaud UN Women on its ability to deliver targets and fulfill its mandates despite the shift in working arrangements which have been in place since March 2020. We recognize the untiring effort of UN Women together with member states and partners, civil society, and all gender champions in promoting gender equality through the empowerment, promotion, and advancement of women and girls everywhere in the world. Let me underscore here that 2021 will be an important year for the UN Women and its Executive Board, as crucial matters such as the next Strategic Plan 2022 to 2025 will be adopted by the Executive Board at its second regular session of 2021. Therefore, during the tenure of the new Bureau and under my presidency, we will continue to elevate the debate at the Executive Board meetings to ensure our discussions are strategic and strengthen the effectiveness of its oversight functions with regard to improved governance. In the same context, I look forward to strengthening our common understanding of what it means for UN Women to have a composite mandate. In particular, I'll be happy to bring closer the normative and operational discussions in order to bridge the normative operational gap. We are all aware of how COVID-19 pandemic continues to expose structural inequalities across every sphere, from health to the economy, security to social protection. And we are all too aware the disproportionate impact of COVID-19 on the life and livelihoods of women and girls, which we believe are really alarming and with alarming consequences too. Structural inequalities are further amplified in the context of fragility, conflict, and emergencies. Distinguished delegate, ladies and gentlemen, advancing gender equality and the rights of women and girls is essential to realizing the promise of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. The barriers that hinder women's advancement in all spheres of their lives and livelihoods continue to persist. According to the findings of the UN Women Evaluation Team, the multifactorial and entrenched gaps between men and women still exist. This is the time for us all to step up and unite around a vision for a more just, inclusive, and equitable world. We need inspiring actions around our common purpose with shared responsibility to achieving opportunity for all. Therefore, UN Women's role in the context of bridging those entrenched gaps remains imperative. As the global champion for the advancement of women and girls' rights, UN Women has a compelling role to play in the UN reforms. This is why 2021 is a critical year for the work of UN Women because of the potential pressure that the entity will be under to ensure that we build back better in a gender-responsive manner. As we look forward to the adoption of the new strategic plan, I commend UN Women for the extensive and inclusive manner it has conducted consultations, particularly when it is coming at a time after the historic landmark event of 25 years of Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, 75 years of the UN, 20 years of the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, 10 years since the creation of UN Women, and the first year of the decade of action to deliver on the SDGs. I look forward to your continuous support, collaboration, and close partnership to achieve our common goal. On that note, the Executive Board will start with agenda item number 1, organizational matters, for the adoption of the annotated provision agenda and work plan for the current session and the report on the second regular session of 2020. Before I give the floor to the Secretary, I would like to bring to the attention of this board the fact that there has not been an endorsed candidate for the Eastern European Group Vice Presidency for 2021. Therefore, after consulting with the Secretariat, I would like to inform you that in line with document UNW/2011/6, Rules of Procedures of the Executive Board of UN Women, Rule 7.1, Georgia shall hold office until its successor is officially nominated and elected if there is no objection from the floor. Is there any objection to this arrangement?
Mr. President, I see no objection.
Thank you. I see no objection. It is so decided. Without further ado, I now invite the Secretary of the Board, Mr. Jean-Luc Boris, to outline the agenda of the session tabled for adoption. Mr. Secretary, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and good morning, Excellency, distinguished delegates. Very good morning to all of you. In order to begin, we shall advance procedures through the adoption of the annotated provisional agenda, as always, and work plan for the first regular session 2021 and the report on the second regular session 2020. Having adopted the aforementioned documents, the first regular session 2021 will be open through a statement by the Undersecretary General and Executive Director, including an update on the COVID-19 response, the implementation of the General Assembly Resolution 72-279, as well as the QCPR, as Member States asked us. The floor will then be open for Member States' intervention managed by the speakers list. The Executive Director and Deputy Executive Directors shall be invited to respond accordingly. The Executive Board will then turn to agenda item 2 on the joint United Nations Programme on HIV and AIDS coordinating board meeting, where we will be joined by the Executive Director of UNAIDS, and the board will then receive a presentation on the recommendations and decisions of the joint UNAIDS coordinating board meeting by Deputy Executive Director Åsa Regner. The floor will then be open for Member States' questions. The Executive Board will then turn to agenda item 3 and receive a briefing on the preparations of the strategic plan by Deputy Executive Director Anita Bhatia and Deputy Executive Director Åsa Regner. After that, the floor will be open for intervention on agenda item 3. At 1 p.m. This morning, session will be adjourned for the lunch break. I just want to bring to your attention that the draft decision 2021 on audit has been put under silence procedure by the facilitator from the German mission until noon time today. If the silence is broken, the lunchtime will be reserved for informal negotiation on the draft decision. I will announce at 1 p.m. how we will proceed on that front. In the afternoon segment, we will start at 3 p.m., where the board will engage in item 4 on evaluation and receive briefing on 2 evaluations. One is the evaluation on support provided by UN Women to the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1325, National Action Plans on Women, Peace and Security. And the second one is the effectiveness and efficiency assessment of UN Women flagship programs, initiative, and thematic priorities for the Strategic Plan 2018-2021. And then both, of course, those evaluation will be followed by the management responses. Upon completion of these respective presentations, the floor will be open again for member states for the intervention and questions. The rest of the day, if needed, will be reserved to informal consultation on the draft decisions. On tomorrow, on the 16th of February, the second day of the first regular session, the plenary meeting will resume at 10, as always, with the agenda item 5, audit matters, where the executive board will be briefed on UN Women financial report and audit financial statements and report of the Board of Auditors. The board will have the opportunity to intervene on matters pertaining to item 5 for discussion with experts on the virtual podium. At 1 p.m., as always, we will adjourn for the lunchtime, and maybe if we need, we will also gather for the draft decision, hopefully not. At 3 p.m., we will resume in the afternoon to reconvene for item 6, policy and program matters. And the board will be briefed on UN Women results and priority in the Europe and Central Asia region by our regional director. The board will then have the opportunity to react on this item, item 6, and then we will turn to agenda item 7 on the plenary meeting, where the chair of the UNDP, UNFPA, UNOPS, and UN Women Staff Council will address the executive board, accompanied by a presentation on the actions taken by UN Women Management on those issues. Before the end of the day, the executive board will turn to agenda item 8, other matters, to take action on the draft decision. We will then turn back to agenda item 1, organizational matters, where we will approve the draft agenda for the annual session 2021. And then we will, as always, close the session, Mr. President, by your statement, the statement of the Executive Director, followed by your statement. And that will be, thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Mr. Secretary. May I take it that the Executive Board now wishes to adopt the annotated provisional agenda and work plan for the first regular session 2021? I see no objection. It is so decided. Thank you. The agenda and work plan, as adopted, will guide us for the rest of this session. Let us now turn to the adoption of the report of the second regular session 2020. May I take it that the Executive Board wishes to adopt the report of the previous session? I see no objection. It's so decided. For the opening of the session, I would like to welcome to the virtual podium the following UN Women colleagues. Madam Fuzile Lambo, Under Secretary General and Executive Director of UN Women. Also, Rainier, Deputy Executive Director for Normative Support and Program Results. Anita Batier, Deputy Executive Director for Resource Management, UN System Coordination, Sustainability and Partnership. Sarah Hendricks, Director of Policy, Program and Intergovernmental Division. We have Apana Merotre, Director of UN Systems Coordination. And you have Rastam Chakraborty, Director and Interim of Human Resources. And Nasim Damji, Policy Advisor, Gender Equality, Health and HIV. Jennifer Cooper, Policy Analysis and Program Development Specialist for the Latin American Caribbean region. Munir Lakhdar Hami, Human Resource Specialist, and Jean-Luc Boris, Secretary of the Executive Board. Without much further ado, I now pass the floor to the Under-Secretary General and Executive Director for her opening statement. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President, Excellencies, and I would also like to greet the Executive Director of UNAIDS and welcome her to this board meeting. Mr. President, let me start by expressing my condolences to all who have lost friends and family through the continuing COVID-19 pandemic. Excellencies, our world is in grief. The pandemic has deepened food insecurity, increased the number of orphans and child-headed households, and lockdowns have resulted in more abuse of women and girls. There is also a looming debt crisis and displacement of women from the labor market. There's a threat of going back to the era where it was assumed a woman's place is at home. We also face troubled and turbulent world right now. Our thoughts are all those who are facing difficulties in countries such as Haiti, Myanmar, and Yemen. We wish them peace, security, and protection of their human rights. This is also time for solidarity as we fight against the pandemic and for equitable shared vaccines. Excellencies, I am pleased to join this first regular session of the UN Women Executive Board 2021. I congratulate you for this opportunity to have you, Mr. President, as our brand new president. I warmly welcome our president, His Excellency Mr. Ali Kaba, Ambassador and Permanent Representative of the Republic of Sierra Leone. I applaud the leadership and commitment already shown by the president in this short time. I also extend a warm welcome and appreciation to the Vice President. His Excellency Maria del Carmen Squief, Permanent Representative of Argentina, Excellency Mr. Gunther Solter, Deputy Permanent Representative of Germany, Excellency Mr. Kimura Tetsuya, Ambassador for the Mission of Japan, and Ms. Eka Kipiani, Counselor from the Mission of Georgia. We look forward to engaging with you in this important year of building back better, which means building back green, equitable, gender responsive, and inclusive. I take this opportunity also to thank once again the outgoing president, Mr. Jukka Salovara, Permanent Representative of Finland, and the entire 2020 Bureau for their impressive leadership and gender equality activism. Distinguished delegates, the gains in gender equality made since the adoption of the Beijing Platform Action have been under almost universal pressure, especially last year, whether it is in education, health, income generation, representation of women, or safety and security. Regression in gender equality threatens the achievement of the 2030 agenda, and it needs a dedicated, bold effort that builds on our breakthroughs, our shortcomings, and lessons learned. COVID-19 has exacerbated existing inequalities across all aspects of life for women and girls and their communities. The impact of lost education for children, especially girls, is likely to have permanent effects for many. Our engagements with civil society, faith-based organizations, and traditional leaders have been about community-driven efforts to stop losing a generation. Traditional leaders that we have partnered with in Africa are promulgating bylaws to further criminalize harmful practices, highlighting the importance of collaborating at community level. We are playing parts in policy advice in every corner of the world and across the UN system, where we're providing gender-sensitive advice. And we are working together with our many external partners. For example, in Timor-Leste, we are giving technical assistance to government. In Vietnam, we are supporting government efforts to safeguard women while they're in quarantine. In Jordan and Bangladesh, we are ensuring integration of gender-responsive planning and preparedness for COVID-19. We've been a leading agency in shaping national action plans for women, peace, and security that also respond to the pandemic. We are driving for sex disaggregated data and evidence, bringing key issues like violence against women and girls right to the highest level of the agenda. We have invested in more than 100 rapid gender assessment forecasts on the socioeconomic COVID-19 impact, and thereby help to shape the UN city's socioeconomic response. We are also amplifying information on the unfolding catastrophic impact globally of the pandemic on women's livelihood, as most of the jobs being lost are women's jobs. As Vice President Harris of the USA has recently said, the mass exodus of women from the workforce is a national emergency, and it demands a national solution, end of quote. Indeed, it is also a global emergency, and it needs all of us to act. We have supported efforts in more than 60 countries and regional offices to enhance social protection and to promote economic resilience and shared responsibility in the context of care. Across all regions, we have supported women-owned businesses through business skills development, online services, and access to publicly funded cash grants under national COVID-19 recovery measures. In Lebanon, 140,000 female-headed households received cash assistance provided under the Emergency National Poverty Targeting Program, where we assisted the government to deliver this much-needed intervention. In El Salvador and Morocco, we have engaged with men and boys on sharing the burden of care, and we have influenced the provision of infrastructure that will relieve women of the burden of care. However, even with all our work, nationally, globally, the response by UN Women and many of us is still not adequate. Our global COVID-19 gender response tracker shows that 42 countries have no gender-sensitive measure at all in response to COVID. We, of course, are engaging those countries. Over $10 trillion have been poured into fiscal and monetary packages, yet only 50% supports measures introduced to cover violence against women and girls, support for unpaid care, and strengthen women's economic security in the ways that will overall entrench gender responsive and equity. We need to intervene in this situation. We have continued to call on an ambitious scaled-up response, given the disproportionate impact of the pandemic on women and girls. According to ILO, reserve banks, international financial institutions, and governments, women are bearing the brunt of economic fallout. Despite this reality, support for women is still somewhat limited. We have been calling for a better targeted response and delivery of services. But I might also add, there are a number of governments who are heeding the call, who are making the effort, but we are not managing to cover all women. UN Women has also been engaging with international financial institutions as they are key role players in the provision of fiscal stimulation. Our ongoing work includes prospective work with the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development on the nexus of green finance and gender. This can bring gender lens to COVID-19 economic recovery plans, building on EBRD's pioneering work on green finance. Excellencies, we call on you as shareholders in international financial institutions to ensure that the fiscal stimulus packages that are addressing these emergencies are also targeted and designed for women. We need you to help us bolster our case on gender responsive recovery. Similarly, recovery efforts must encompass both short and long-term action, including the addressing of the shadow pandemic of violence against women and girls, an issue on which UN Women has led informed shaping of the national policies response and plans across all regions. 68 of UN Women offices have provided support to member states to prevent and respond to violence against women and girls. The pandemic has also exacerbated women's participation in decision-making. An analysis of COVID-19 task forces from 87 countries found that only 3.5% had gender parity in the task forces. Since the early days of the pandemic last year, we have been working to bring women's informed voices to the national, and regional response, using mechanisms such as the African Women's Leaders Network and strengthening political action for gender-responsive plans and budget. For example, in Bosnia-Herzegovina, a gender analysis of the federal budget led to rebalance in the COVID-19 context and enabled MPs to request specific resources allocations for women entrepreneurs and to avoid budget cuts to social support provisions for families. As we look ahead, emerging from the crisis, aspects like parity in political representation take an increased agency. Women's leadership and increased participation in decision-making will be cornerstone to sustain democratic values and enhance management. We need bold and ambitious change here. The pandemic must not in any way hinder the bold action needed for addressing gender equality. It is needed right now. This should not be a deterrent for gender equality and for bolstered women's participation. The upcoming session next month of the Commission on the Status of Women is an opportunity to make bold decisions on women's participation. The pandemic, as I say, is not a deterrent for advancing women's leadership. On the contrary, it makes it more urgent. Both International Women's Day and the Commission of the Status of Women will focus on women's leadership. The priority theme recognizes how women and men can collectively solve the urgent challenges of our time through fast-track equal power sharing in public life. CSW is your platform to show our ambition and address of the lost ground. It is an unmissable opportunity in 2021 that we cannot let go. We need to rise up to the occasion. I hope we will witness strong political will expressed through ambitious and bold agreed conclusions that will strengthen the global normative framework and send a message to the whole world. We count on you to include civil society in your delegations to this virtual CSW. In this moment, we need also to advocate for all women in their diversity, especially those women who are facing multiple intersecting forms of discrimination, young women who must participate equally in decision-making levels. Excellencies, also an important aspect of our work is the fight for a more equal future and ensuring racial justice inside UN Women and across the UN system. We have embarked vigorously on this work. In UN Women, we have appointed an official to drive the change and address racial inequality and bias within our midst. All our divisions have been asked to address perception and real racism concern in their teams. I request, Mr. President, you to help us to fight racism wherever it exists and everywhere in the UN, including in UN Women. We need to make sure that you, as the executive board, pronounce clearly that this is also your priority. On the implementation of General Assembly Resolution 72/279 on the repositioning of United Nations Development System and 2020 Quadrennial Comprehensive Policy Review of Operational Activities for Development of the United Nations System, QCPR, it is a long. We recognize that the issues at hand are much greater than UN Women's capacity. We know we must entrench the work on gender equality in the UN system at a scale that is needed. We welcome the QCPR, which has emphasized gender mainstreaming, has provided excellent language for collaboration between agencies, has also enabled us to work with the disability, youth participation, as well as at a UN city. Our strategic plan is also unfolding. We aim to cast the net wider also to make sure that we have partners to complement our strategic plan 2022 to 2025. This can only succeed if we act together as that with the diverse stakeholders. We need support for a strategic plan that is rights-based, that is bold, that brings about changing and protect our gains, a plan that is also entrenching our coordination, our normative mandate, and a selective and strategic operations. We look forward to our outstanding consultation so that we can bring and hear your voices and reflect them in the strategic plan. That is why we also see generation equality as an important platform to extend participation and support for our strategic plan. The success of our strategic plan cannot just depend on the efforts of the UN Women, but it draws the support from across the field in our partners and across the world. It is an important tool. It is also important in making sure that the UN system works together. We have ensured that we have a shared common vision together with the other UN agencies that takes forward the work of addressing the issues raised in the 25-year review of the Beijing Platform for Action, as well as advancing the implementation of the decade vision. This past year has been a strong validation and demonstration of our coordination work on a system-wide response and through repositioning process. For example, it is evident that it is this strong coordination focus that has made sure that the immediate socio-economic response to COVID-19 and the recovery-led response reflected the needs of women. And the Response and Recovery Multi-Partner Trust Fund also reflected the needs of women significantly. Generation equality will build on these successes. This vision of greatly increased alignment around the work of gender equality is one into which we believe the Generation Equality Forum and Action Coalition will make an important contribution in line with our mandate. Generation equality players will be able to reach where we cannot reach and where women and girls need us. They will expand the resource base, which is currently not proportional to the needs of women. Generation equality will help us with fulfilling some of the promises that have not been fulfilled since we made them in Beijing. It will respond also to the needs that have now been created by the pandemic and accelerate the achievement of the SDGs in the decade of action. The co-leadership, co-ownership, and thought leadership that is presented in generation equality will ensure that we have rich multilateral activity that is inclusive of all ages and includes private sector, young people, includes men and boys, and includes many people in our communities who are part of civil society, both at community level as well as international level. We have successfully brought in young people around the world. Youth involvement in the discourse has brought over 15 million people already involved in Generation Equality Forum preparation and consultation events. This includes leaders in generation equality, an intergenerational network of over 200 women leaders across the world. The leadership of Generation Equality has 25 governments that have already joined. I would like you to support this and see it as a support to the work that we are doing in the strategic plan, as well as the work that you are guiding us to do as this board. On our funding, distinguished delegates, I have mentioned the importance of new funding, which we are trying to generate also through generation equality. I must stress this, two of the three aspects of our mandate, coordination and normative elements, remain relatively underfunded within an overall positive picture. and we will pay attention to this. They are hard to fundraise for outside the member states. We have an overall encouraging financial picture as we begin 2021. Thank you to your generous support. Preliminary figures indicate that UN Women will reach its highest total contribution revenue of around $544 million for 2020, exceeding 2019's high $510.5 million. This is significant achievement, and I thank all our donors for their steadfast and increased support that recognize the needs of women and girls in the context of the competing COVID-19 resources. Regular resources or core resources have reached an all-time record for UN Women, with preliminary figures around $165 million, a 15% increase over 2019, although still below the integrated budget projection of $200 million. We appreciate all those who made regular resources payment early in 2020 and recognize the increase from governments of Denmark, Finland, Germany, Italy, Sweden, and USA. I remain watchful and over the continuing lack of balance between core and non-core resources, which influence our ability to deliver high quality and timely support. The share of core contribution compared to non-core is still about 30%. Let me also thank the European Union for the UN-EU Spotlight Initiative, which boosted our total resources to over $17 million received from EU in 2020. The work that we are doing in Spotlight is continuing to make significant contribution in many countries where we implement this initiative. I'd also like to thank the government of Ireland for hosting second annual roundtable last month. The opportunity to build consensus around support and overall strategic priorities, including the work with international financial institutions, has been valuable. We remain hopeful that you will help us to receive and build more cooperation with these institutions. Distinguished delegates, you will have seen my year-end management letter to the Secretary General that has been shared with all member states, in which I certify the reporting of all allegations of sexual exploitation and abuse that have been brought to my attention in 2020, and the taking of all appropriate measures. We are not complacent on this issue. The prevention and response to sexual harassment in one of the areas in which we strongly collaborate through the UN. In conclusion, Mr. President, we recently learned of the passing of one of our founding mothers of UN Women, Margaret Snyder, affectionately known as Peg. She would be proud of the spirit and the ethos that endures as part of her legacy. We salute her and her pioneering spirit, and we're thankful to stand on her shoulder. I have great pride in the dedicated personnel of UN Women. These are the people who confront the problems of the pandemic faced by women and girls every day. Many have had to manage work and increase responsibilities at home in times in social isolation. We thank them for their dedication. We offer maximum flexibility so that they can also manage their work-life balance. We look forward to work with you to build back better, to ensure that building back better is green, is equitable, is gender responsive, and is inclusive. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Madam Executive Director for her very informative and comprehensive report. Before opening the floor for your statement, I wish to gently remind delegations that the time limit set for delivering statements during the general discussion is 5 minutes for group statements and 3 minutes for individual delegations. In order to make an efficient and optimal use of the time, given the constraints of virtual sessions. Delegations invited to send statement in both PDF and Word format to estatements@un.org. All presentations made by the Secretariat will be kept to a minimum as all documents have since been posted online for 4 weeks prior to this session for an interactive discussion to the extent possible. For the ease of managing the speakers list, all participants are requested to add their name or UN agency affiliations before their names. Permanent representatives, deputy permanent representatives, and chargé d'affaires are kindly requested to also add their titles, PR, DPR, or CDA as appropriate after their names. And you may click the raise hand icon now. Without further ado, I would like to give the floor to the first speaker on my list here, and it goes to the distinguished permanent representative of Angola, Her Excellency Maria de Jesus Ferreira, deliver a statement on behalf of the African Group. You have the floor, Excellency.
Good morning, President. Good morning, Excellencies. Mr. President, I have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of the African Group. The African Group warmly congratulates you, Mr. President, and Vice Presidents of the Executive Board on your election. I thank the African Group for the confidence placed in you by electing you to represent the continent in the Bureau of its President. The African Group assures you of its full support and cooperation throughout your tenure. It is with profound gratitude that I take this opportunity on behalf of the African Group to thank the outgoing President, His Excellency Mr. Juca Salovara, for its inspiring and unshakable commitment to duty as President of the Board for 2020. We weekly extend our appreciation to the Vice Presidents and all members of the Bureau for their unwavering support to the work of the Bureau and for their support to the outgoing President of the Board for 2020. The African Group further thank you, Mr. President and Executive Director, for your insightful opening statements this morning. We also wish to express our deep appreciation to Madam Executive Director and her UN Women team at the Secretariat for the tremendous groundwork done in the preparation of this section and for the comprehensive report of the second regular section held in 2020, which has just been adopted. Mr. President, UN Women achieved important progress in the implementation of current strategic plan 2018-2021. We believe that the review of the implementation of this plan, which as the result of lengthy discussions among the UN membership, should contribute to discussion on the next strategic plan. Those consultations should also be based on General Assembly Resolution 772/279 on the repositioning of the United Nations Development System, which forms the overall framework of the development activities by the UN entities. Africa recognized the UN Women's efforts across its 5 outcomes defined in the Strategic Plan 2018-2021, and we wish to state that the role of the UN Women remains relevant in supporting the full, effective, and accelerated implementation of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action and the Achievement of Sustainable Development Goals 5. Mr. President, it is clear that with the COVID-19 pandemic, the UN system, including UN Women, will need to adjust their activities to assist member states in achieving tangible results relevant to the context and challenges. The organization made several efforts to fully align with the UN development system reforms in support of gender equality and human empowerment, and it is important to recall in this regard that during COVID-19 times, there's need to be a strong development-based approach and also alignment with the national priorities of African countries, since the socioeconomic impacts of the pandemic have disproportionately affected women and girls, especially in humanitarian situations and in rural areas. Several UN Women reports have indicated that there is still a lot to be done to empower women and provide them with the same opportunities as men. Special attention should be paid to the needs and vulnerabilities of women as mothers and caregivers in Africa. In this regard, UN Women should strengthen its presence in Africa through well-funded country office to focus on quality social and economic support for women in our continent. We believe that UN Women should continue focusing on its thematic areas, especially on those where the targets set in the strategic plan have not been fully achieved. In the face of COVID-19, it is particularly crucial to prioritize assistance to the COVID-19 recovery efforts and sustainable development, with special emphasis on poverty eradication, addressing unemployment, as well as unpaid care and domestic work, and strengthening social protection system to support women. UN Women should assist member states in line with the imperative of national ownership, aligning with the national priorities based on national development plans and strategies, and supporting national capacity development as a key strategy for sustainable development. Mr. President, to conclude, we believe that more sustainable results can be achieved when the international community works together on the basis of broad consensus and mutually agreed terms. It is important that the upcoming discussion on strategic plan focus on the terms and languages that are consensually agreed upon by the UN membership in SDGs and in the latest General Assembly resolutions. I thank you for listening. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Excellency. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Mexico, Her Excellency, Ms. Alicia Buenrostro, to deliver a cross-regional statement. You have the floor, Excellency. Mexico.
Thank you, Mr. President and Executive Director. I am delivering this statement on behalf of the following 36 member states: Australia, Austria, Belgium, Bulgaria, Canada, Colombia, Costa Rica, Denmark, Estonia, Finland, France, Georgia, Germany, Greece, Guatemala, Iceland, Ireland, Israel, Italy, Japan, Latvia, Luxembourg, Moldova, Mongolia, Montenegro, the Kingdom of the Netherlands, New Zealand, Norway, Romania, Sweden, Switzerland, Turkey, Ukraine, the United Kingdom, the United States, and my own country, Mexico. Please note this statement has been shortened for delivery and that a full version will be uploaded online. Madam Executive Director, the 2020 Quadrennial Comprehensive Policy Review provides the UN development system with critical direction to support the achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. At a juncture when progress on the SDGs is at high risk of backsliding. For the first time, the QCPR text includes strategic direction on climate and biodiversity issues, digital technologies, persons with disabilities, violence against women and girls, sexual exploitation, abuse and sexual harassment, and youth. This landmark achievement sets the tone for greener and more inclusive development as the world comes together to respond to and recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. To make the most of what the QCPR can achieve, we must have a monitoring and reporting framework underpinning it. We know that the funds and programs will be collaborative partners in developing such a framework that can be used over the next 4 years to monitor progress on this ambitious agenda. The new QCPR monitoring and reporting framework should be focused with a clear set of evidence-based indicators that individual agencies will incorporate into their respective results frameworks. The COVID-19 pandemic has placed additional strain on the development system and its resources. We thank all agencies and their staff for their intensive efforts during this challenging period. The pandemic has truly tested the ability of the system to adapt and work together, in some places exposing weakness and in others strength. The QCPR reaffirms the importance of implementing key UN reform initiatives. As member states, we expect agencies to play their part in consolidating the reforms, including ensuring full implementation of the management and accountability framework, increasing efficiencies through harmonized business operations, and aligning their activities with the United Nations Sustainable Development Cooperation frameworks. The new cycle of the strategic plans of the agencies will have to anchor their work to the pillars of the reform. In this context, we urge all agencies to define system-wide coherence as a priority objective in their strategic plans, identify key points from the QCPR that require further action, and ensure that implementation of these reforms are central to the system-wide results framework. We are encouraged by the QCPR's new instruction to the system to make progress on the interlinked agendas of climate and biodiversity. This includes a commitment for UN development system entities to mainstream climate and environmental responsive approaches in their programs to support program countries in achieving their Paris Agreement commitments and to reduce their own environmental footprint. This year is critical for addressing the climate crisis, and we expect meaningful progress in this area, including at COP26. Agenda 2030 seeks to create a socially inclusive world in which the needs of the most vulnerable are met. The QCPR reflects this with a focus on the poorest and most vulnerable to ensure no one is left behind. This includes all children, youth, persons with disabilities, people living with HIV/AIDS, other older persons, indigenous peoples, refugees, and internally displaced people and migrants. In responding to the COVID-19 pandemic, we must build back better for all, ensuring a sustainable, inclusive, and resilient recovery. This includes mainstreaming the UN Disability Inclusion Strategy. Achieving global sustainable development and the goals set out in the 2030 Agenda is impossible without gender equality. We wish to additionally highlight the importance of the accelerating gender mainstreaming and gender equality expertise throughout the system, the critical significance of girls' education, and the full realization of human rights. The QCPR resolution calls upon all development system entities to enhance coordination with humanitarian and peace and security entities, reinforcing the importance of the nexus for sustainable development and sustaining peace. In order to sustain peace and prevent conflict, agencies should engage in early joint risk-informed analysis and planning and ensure a conflict-sensitive approach. Strengthening the leadership of resident and humanitarian coordinators is key to improve the impact of the UN in fragile and conflict-affected contexts. And to conclude, we look forward to the update the agencies will provide at the annual board session on the QCPR implementation, and we welcome an open and continued dialogue on how the ambitious targets will be met as part of the new strategic plans. Thank you very much, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mexico for her statement. Now give the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Maria del Carmen Scuefe, permanent representative of Argentina and Vice President of the Bureau. You have the floor, Excellency.
Thank you, Mr. President. Excellencies, dear friends, I wish to commend at the outset your election as President of the UN Women Executive Board 2021, as well as my fellow Vice Presidents and member of the board. Argentina is honored to be part in the Executive Board of such a fundamental organization as UN Women for the UN system, as well as a long-standing partner to our national efforts. I thank Madam Undersecretary General, Executive Director of the UN Women for her remarks. First of all, Argentina commends UN Women for its early and fast response to COVID-19. I would in particular like to thank you, UN Women staff who have continued to assist women and girls during the pandemic under difficult conditions. We must all commit to building back better and more gender equal, together with all women and girls, men and boys in all their diversity. Argentina appreciates the work that UN Women has undertaken to promote gender equality and empowerment of women throughout the world. The government of President Alberto Fernandez has decided to valorize gender equality policy in a powerful way through the creation of the Ministry of Women, Gender and Diversity. Its creation shows a deep commitment to building a more equal society that promotes the comprehensive autonomy of all people without establishing differences among the various sexual orientations, identities, or gender expressions. The priority is also expressed in several measures, such as the recovery of the institutional framework by the Directorate of Women and Gender Affairs of the Minister of Foreign Affairs, the creation of the National Cabinet for the mainstreaming of gender policies, the great battery of measures implemented to confront the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on all women and girls, which was recognized by this agency, and national action plans such as the Gender-Based Violence Campaign, among others. The fight against inequality and injustices on gender is a priority in the current government agenda, putting at the service of the society the institutional and management tools necessary to confront this problem in an effective way. Finally, to conclude, let me reiterate our commitment to working closely with UN Women and the Executive Board in the year toward these objectives to advance in a gender agenda that promotes and strengthens the right of all women and girls around the world in the adverse context of COVID pandemic. Finally, I seriously regret that this session is proceeding without interpretation. Mr. President, communication between us is essential. Interpretation is not a luxury of the multilateral system. It is an imperative need for the correct and equal development of our work. Thank you.
Thank the distinguished representative of Argentina for your comment. Now I'll give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Gunther Sauter, distinguished representative of Germany and Vice President of the Bureau. You have the floor, Excellency.
Mr. President, dear Ali, dear colleagues, thank you, Madam Executive Director, for the update of UN Women's work in response to COVID-19. We appreciate the inclusive process on elaborating the next strategic plan, and we welcome your strong commitment for the alignment with the QCPR. A word on COVID. Given the disproportionate impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on women and girls, the threat of losing years of progress on gender equality, we need for the rights
Corté lo más importante, amor, es muy largo. 3 minutos es...
Ambassador, you are muted.
Please proceed. Yes, Excellency, please proceed. You have the floor.
Thank you. I was going to say, Ali, we equally need strong allies, partnerships and networks in order to join forces, and we encourage UN Women to continue establishing itself as a go-to institution both inside and outside the UN system. Working towards gender-responsive building back better strategies is key. The cooperation with UNDP on the Global Gender Response Tracker, the gender marker in the MPTF, and the cooperation with the IFES are promising examples that we want to see taken further. Regarding your cooperation with the IFES, we appreciate more detailed information on concrete activities and results which could be integrated in the annual reporting. On the work of UN Women, looking ahead, UN Women's comparative advantage, the triple mandate anchored in a rights-based approach should guide us. The QCPR provides a strong mandate. We welcome the thematic areas suggested for the next strategic plan. It will be important to effectively link coordination, normative and operational work underpinned by strong theories of change. Let me say in this context, the strategic plan is UN Women's documents. Member states provide guidance and oversight. That's the division of labor. Normative work should be integrated into all thematic areas in the future. In doing so, the central role of UN Women must be preserved. The QCPR has also set the tone for advancing on climate and digitalization. While we must not dilute the mandate of UN Women and should have clear priorities, we consider both subjects as future-oriented and cross-cutting. Regarding UN reform, we encourage UN Women to take the impetus given by the QCPR on mainstreaming gender work across the system. We equally encourage you to seek synergies with sister agencies by exploring more on joint programming, including in humanitarian action and working on the triple nexus. 2020 has not only created challenges, it has opened avenues for innovation. We have proved as member states that we can provide guidance and oversight in a digital manner. We should continue the practice of holding at least one of our executive board sessions virtually. This is also a good means of enabling more participation from capitals and smaller missions. A last word on live interpretation. This is a fundamental precondition. We urge the agencies to continue working with the Secretariat's Conference Management Services on this issue. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Germany for his comments. Now I give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Kimura Tetsuya, distinguished representative of Japan and Vice President of the Bureau. Excellency, you have the floor.
Good morning. I would like to begin by thanking the President of the Executive Board, Ambassador Kaba, for organizing this board session amid the continuous difficult circumstances. Once again, we look forward to working closely together under your leadership this year. I would also like to thank Executive Director Ms. Murambo Nukuka for her comprehensive statement and informative update. Mr. President, first, I would like to commend UN Women for its continuing global response to COVID-19. We appreciate the dedication of all the staff in the field in the difficult situations. However, in spite of the concerted response of the international community, the socio-economic impact of the pandemic will leave long-standing adverse consequences on women and girls' lives. In light of this, Japan has recently decided to contribute over $12.8 million this year to UN Women's projects that support the prevention from COVID-19, as well as the livelihood, empowerment, and leadership of women affected by COVID-19 in Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. Second, in the next UN Women's Strategic Plan, 2022 to 2025, Japan supports the agency's effort to focus on its triple mandate and to respond to the emerging global issues and shifts in the international environment. The concept of human security is particularly useful in tackling new challenges. It assists UN Women and member states in identifying and addressing widespread and cross-cutting challenges to the survival, livelihood, and dignity of women and girls, and calls for people-centered, comprehensive, context-specific, and prevention-oriented responses that strengthen the protection and empowerment of all women and girls, as well as all communities, in particular the most vulnerable. We hope to see this approach being applied to activities on the ground. Third, in the repositioning of the United Nations development system, Japan expects UN Women to further strengthen its role within the system. Intensive coordination with the UN agencies that are specialized in specific subject area is important in terms of rendering the best result and resource optimization. UN Women can display its expertise by setting and sharing global norms standards with relevant partners. In this context, we are eager to see how UN Women plans to transform their coordination with partner agencies on the ground in protecting and empowering women and girls through its next strategic plan. Japan stands ready to support the activities of UN Women together with other member states. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank you. Now I'll give the floor to the distinguished permanent representative of Mongolia, His Excellency Ekpol Shilov. Please, you have the floor, Excellency.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, let me congratulate you, Ambassador Kaba, and your newly elected bureau members on your election. You can count on my delegation full support during this exceptional year. Madam Executive Director, I'd like to thank you for your comprehensive statement. My delegation strongly supports the triple mandate of the UN Women, and I commend UN Women and its staff for their efforts to promote gender equality and women empowerment as a cross-cutting issue, especially UN system-wide response to the COVID-19. I fully agree with you that the pandemic indeed threatens to reverse the progress made in achieving gender equality and women empowerment. In this regard, the new QCPR serves as a vital guidance to support UN development agencies in achieving SDGs while adapting to a new normal. UN Women leadership in interagency collaboration to address critical data gaps through the Gender Monitor serves as a solid resource to encourage gender responsive policy action on COVID-19. In my own country, as a part of 4-year endeavor to generate robust data and evidence on GBV for better policies and actions, study on economic costs of intimate partner and violence in Mongolia was conducted by UN agencies in collaboration with my government. My delegation fully supports the UN Women's work related to the Secretary General's resolution, Security Council resolution on 1325, and we deem important that UN Women's assistance in developing national program of action. UN Women achieved decent results in the performance of the strategic plan. I commend UN Women management and the staff for keeping its mandate high on the agenda of the UN system-wide COVID-19 response and in implementing GA resolution on 72/279 to improve the efficiency, effectiveness, and transparency and accountability of the United Nations Development System. Mr. President, to enhance implementation of the Sustainable Development Agenda during the decade of action, Government of Mongolia adopted long-term development program, so-called Vision 2050. As part of this policy and to ensure full implementation of the law on gender equality, my government's priority is to ensure women's economic and empowerment and support small, medium business owner women. As we discussed next, the strategic plan and the implementation of the QCPR during the session, I believe that UN Women will continue to ensure strong focus on the gender equality and women empowerment in the UN framework for the immediate socioeconomic response to the COVID-19. Moreover, I look forward to hear more about the information about Generation Equality Forum and how the 6 action coalitions will enhance UN Women's Mandate delivery. I also hope that the strategic plan would include such important dimensions as the digital, technology, climate, and environmental agenda. We look forward to continuing our commitment to UN Women Mandate and engage actively within the executive process. I thank you, President.
I thank the distinguished permanent representative of Mongolia for his comments. Now I give the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Fatima Rabab, permanent representative of Bangladesh. You have the floor, Excellency.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Delighted to see in the chair. Warmest congratulations to you and other members of the Bureau on your election. I thank the Executive Director for a comprehensive and sobering report. And I commend her for her leadership in steering UN Women through this extraordinary crisis. And I salute also all staff for their dedication and courage. Mr. President, 2020 was a very challenging year for all of us, but more so for women. In the lockdown, we saw an alarming rise in violence against women. They became more vulnerable to exploitation and abuse, and their economic empowerment and incomes faced a setback. The situation of women in conflict and crisis situation is also particularly vulnerable. We thank UN Women for its efforts to create awareness on the gender dimensions of the pandemic and for advocating inclusion of women in COVID response measures. The data and analysis of the socioeconomic impacts produced by UN Women of the pandemic on women was also very, very useful. We wish to see UN Women remaining strongly engaged in pandemic recovery efforts at the national level. Mr. President, in Bangladesh, due to the pandemic, the industrial sector of the country, especially the RMG sector, which accounts for an overwhelming majority of the women workers, suffered immensely. Over 2 million of them were made jobless. So small and cottage industry and the informal sector, where the large majority of women are employed, were also severely impacted. To address the pandemic crisis, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina announced a comprehensive stimulus package with many specifically designed for women. The government announced soft loans at subsidized rate for women-headed SMEs and MMEs, and compensation for job and income loss of the RMG workers. Social safety net programs were bolstered, trainings for alternative income generating activities with special focus on vulnerable women were also arranged. Mr. President, with the pandemic yet to recede, our efforts will need to continue. It would be useful to know how UN Women plans to mitigate the situation of women hit by the pandemic crisis, especially the most vulnerable, and the sectors which have been severely impacted, including through job recovery, reskilling and upskilling efforts for the post-pandemic job market. We would like to know how pandemic response measures are being factored into the next strategic plan. We believe that taking lessons from the ongoing pandemic, the new plan must incorporate provisions for policy support to the national governments in combating emergencies that disproportionately affect the lives of women. We welcome the assurances given that the strategic plan will be developed through a consultative process. It is important to ensure national ownership. In terms of implementation, Mr. President, we would like to see enhanced coherence among the various UN entities at the country level as gender is cross-cutting. UN Women's leadership in implementing the strategic plan should be in full alignment with the spirit of QCPR, tailored to country situations and their needs. And I fully echo the ED's proposal to strengthen synergy and efforts with the Commission on the Status of Women in taking forward the women's agenda. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the permanent representative of Bangladesh for her comment. I give the floor now to Her Excellency, Ms. Engriselda Lopez, distinguished permanent representative of El Salvador. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Congratulations on your election, as well as to the other members of the Executive Board. My country would like to reiterate its support for the work of UN Women. We recognize their leadership and efforts to fulfill their mandate. It is undeniable that the impacts of the pandemic have been more significant on women and girls of all ages and in all their diversity. This emergency has deepened gender inequalities, both inside and outside homes. That is why the work of UN Women on the ground represents an important support for the response that national governments are doing to face this emergency. In my country, the Salvadoran Institute for the Development of Women, ISDEMU, has carried out significant actions to make visible and to attend the implications that this emergency may have in the lives of women and girls. In this sense, we would like to thank the support provided by UN Women to El Salvador through different initiatives. For instance, they provided instrumental support for the Salvador government in the efforts to fight the COVID-19 spread, particularly through the Spotlight Initiative, adapting its activities to continue helping women and girls, including through sanitation and hygiene kits and biosecurity packages for women, promoting protocols for detecting and addressing violence against women and girls, and also to providing training to public officers to eradicate and identify violence against women and girls, among other actions. I would like to highlight the project, Women Free from Violence in Public Transportation, for which UN Women will be involved in this implementation. We look forward to continuing our close partnership with UN Women with this and other initiatives. I would like also to express that UN Women can count on the firm support of El Salvador in all the spaces within and outside the United Nations system to increasingly promote a true empowerment of all women and girls, and increasingly strengthen UN Women in its internal procedures and in its impact on the ground. To conclude, Mr. Chair, we invite UN Women to continue strengthening joint work with the government of El Salvador to face the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and to promote economic autonomy of women, their access to sexual and reproductive health, the promotion of women's rights to a life free of violence, as well as improve access to inclusive education, considering the particular needs and our national priorities. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished permanent representative of El Salvador for her comment. Now give the floor to His Excellency Honorary Pride, permanent representative of Nepal. Excellency,
thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, Mr. President, I'd like to congratulate you and other Bureau members on your election, and let me assure you of my delegation's full support in the discharge of your important responsibilities. It is commendable that the UN Women has emerged as a global leader in promoting gender-sensitive response to COVID-19. We really appreciate Executive Director Madam Fumjile leadership and her team's efforts in this regard. Mr. President, UN Women has played a pivotal role in its first 10 years in setting global norms and standards to achieve gender equality and empowerment of all women and girls, and translating these standards towards development and implementation of gender-responsive laws, policies, and programs. As the current pandemic threatens to roll back the hard-on development gains, deepens all forms of inequalities, and undermines women's rights, we need a strong, focused, and well-equipped UN entity that leads the efforts to safeguard the achievements and navigate way forward. We believe that a scaled-up UN Women 2.0 will focus more on its comparative advantage and further strengthen its ability. A knowledge-based UN Women with a robust global network is critical to advance the agenda of women empowerment and gender equality. In this context, we look forward to a progressive UN Women's Strategic Plan 2022-2025. It is important to build on the lessons learned and achievements of the current strategic plan and chart out an ambitious new strategic plan. We appreciate UN Women's active engagement in the repositioning of the United Nations development system and its contributions to gender responsive implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. We are confident that the Gender Equality Forum will add a tremendous value through teaming up with the young generations of women's rights activists and senior visionary leaders to bring transformative changes in the lives of women and girls around the world. Mr. President, I conclude by reiterating my delegation's strong commitment to working closely with Executive Board and other members in making this year a year of action and delivery towards promoting gender equality and empowering women and girls. I thank you, Mr. President. I wish you all success in your endeavor. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished permanent representative of Nepal for his comments. Now I give the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Amal Mudatlali, the distinguished permanent representative of Lebanon. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Brother Ali. Thank you. Before I start, I would like to congratulate women everywhere on a historic achievement today. Congratulations to the daughter of Africa, Okonjo Iweala of Nigeria, for her election as the first woman head of WTO and first African to head the organization. This is an achievement. We are moving forward. Let us rejoice. The second thing I would like to mention is to pay tributes and condolences on the passing of one of the founding mothers of UN Women, Margaret Snyder. She would have been so proud today of the organization and of the progress women are making everywhere, despite the setbacks and the slow pace of change. Mr. President, allow me at the outset to congratulate you, Brother Ali, on your election as President of the Executive Board, and congratulate the members of the Bureau as well. I would also like to thank the permanent representative of Finland, UN Ambassador Jukka Salovaara, for his successful presidency of the board last session. Mr. President, I would like to take this opportunity to thank the Executive Director of UN Women, Ms. Phumzile Ngako, for her comprehensive statement and commend her leadership in advancing gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls around the world in such difficult times. Mr. President, we thank UN Women for the update on the development of the next strategic plan for 2022-2025, and we look forward to the presentation of the draft and the endorsement of the plan during our second regular session. As the strategic plan is being developed, Lebanon welcomes, first, the whole society approach. Second, the partnerships with different stakeholders, including civil society and the media. Third, the diversification of partnerships with international financial institutions. Fourth, the incorporation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda and the humanitarian work in the plan. Fifth, the alignment of the plan with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, with the driving goal of leading no one behind. Sixth and final, the further development of the triple mandate of UN Women. Mr. President, we welcome UN Women global response to COVID-19 pandemic and its efforts to ensure a strong focus on gender equality to combat the shadow pandemic, and to ensure that the hard-won gains of women's empowerment and gender equality over the last decades are maintained. We thank UN Women in Lebanon for its support to gender mainstreaming in our national response. We salute UN Women's commitment to have a victim-centered approach at the heart of its prevention and response to sexual exploitation and abuse, and its engagement in the repositioning of the United Nations development system. Mr. President, we thank the United Nations for launching at the beginning of this year Lebanon's window in the Women's Peace and Humanitarian Fund, WPHF, to support women and girls in their response to the Beirut blast of the 4th of August and the recovery process. We thank the government of Germany for their generous funding and their contribution to the seed money for the Lebanon funding window, as well as the government of Canada and the European Union for their valuable support. We also thank UN Women for serving as the fund secretariat, and we call on all our friends and partners to support this and contribute to this cause that's a direct contribution to peace building and recovery in Lebanon. Mr. President, as we look forward to the development of an ambitious and focused strategic plan, we assure you, UN Women, of our full support. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished permanent representative of Lebanon for her comment. I give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Sofiane Imoun, the permanent representative of Algeria. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President and Brother Ali. Let me start by warmly congratulating you on your election as President of UN Women Executive Board. Your leadership and your wisdom will undoubtedly ensure the success of this session. I would like also to thank Madam Fumzili Mlambo Ngoka for her opening remarks and for the commitment to achieving UN Women's mandate. It is a pleasure to have two representatives of Africa leading UN Women. You as the chair of the executive board and Mrs. Luka as the executive director of the agency. I see in the African leadership of UN Women this year an opportunity for our continent to be more visible on the issue related to women and girls empowerment, and for the UN Women to be more present in Africa to support regional efforts in this regard. The election, or the recent election of our sister Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala as Director General of the WTO is auspicious. Mr. President, 2020 has witnessed a global pandemic which deepened inequalities and worsened the development crisis with severe impacts on the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of women. It has disproportionately impacted women and girls everywhere, but at the same time, it created a new momentum for a greater focus on women's empowerment and leadership. Considering that they represent 70% of the frontline health and social workers worldwide deserving, therefore, our gratitude, recognition, and support. In this regard, 2021 should be a forward-looking year for UN Women to ensure that the economic and social effect of the pandemic, especially on level of poverty and employment, are properly addressed through gender-sensitive approaches. Therefore, addressing the feminization of poverty must be a vital part of our broader poverty eradication strategies and should constitute the top priority for the new strategic plan. Furthermore, women's leadership and labor must be addressed through social assistance and programs. In this regard, the new strategic plan should properly tackle the gaps in social protection and family-oriented policies worldwide to ensure work-life balance for women. Moreover, measures to protect women from all forms of violence must be a standard part of the UN Women Strategic Plan to prevent and eliminate violence against women and girls. Mr. President, recognizing to women's role throughout the Algerian history, from the struggle against colonialism to the fight against terrorism and to building today's society, the Algerian government has been and will remain committed to the empowerment of women. Algeria has indeed put in place policies and mechanisms that are responsive to women's needs and ensure their participation in the decision-making processes, as well as national plans to combat violence against women and girls and protect the victims. In the context of the COVID-19, the existing mechanisms have been strengthened by putting in place helplines and shelters across the country to tackle their needs and to ensure their protection. The effort made by Algeria to empower women are internationally recognized. Algeria is among the champions in the MENA region for women representation in elected assemblies with a rate of 31.6%. Furthermore, Algeria recorded the highest rate of women engineers in the world, 48.5%, twisting the prevailing idea that women are not represented enough in the field of science and technology. This last achievement is even more relevant as we celebrated on February 11th, the International Day of Women and Girls in Science, and committed to bridge the gap of women representation in this area. At the international level, Algeria has proudly co-presented the resolution entitled Strengthening National and International Rapid Response to the Impact of COVID-19 on Women and Girls, calling the international community to respond to women's and girls' needs and ensure that they are appropriately involved in response plans. Building on these achievements, my delegation will continue to spare no efforts to promote the agenda of women and girls' advancement in a balanced and constructive manner. We look forward to UN Women's support to our national and international efforts through a strengthened presence in the ground in Algeria. Let me conclude, Mr. President, by reiterating Algeria's appreciation for UN Women's work and assure you of my delegation commitment to support your efforts in undertaking the important task ahead of us this year. And I thank you.
I thank the distinguished permanent representative of Algeria for his comment. I now give the floor to Her Excellency, Ms. Alessandra Vivet, permanent representative of Andorra. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. And at the outset, I would like to congratulate you and the members of the Bureau on your election. And I take the opportunity also to recognize UN Women as a paramount entity in the United Nations system. In the year of its 10th anniversary, UN Women has proved its strength to pushing everyone in the field and in the office to really transform the world to become a little more equal. Thank you, Mr. President and Executive Director, for your meaningful remarks as well. For a year now, COVID-19 has been impacting everywhere. Not sector has been spared on the threats and challenges caused by the shutdowns, confinement, health problems, just to mention a few of a long list of multiple drivers. And all these have a commonality, women as first responders everywhere, at all levels. In this regard, we want to commend UN Women for the immediate reaction to the pandemic by launching surveys, taking measures, calling for a gender perspective and financial aid, among other actions despite the difficulties. The shadowed pandemic, the violence, the home mainly against women then was uncovered. We appreciate the positive impacts of the rights of women on those initiatives and the actions of UN Women at the very heart of the UN system and on the financial entities. In this context of the pandemic and the decade of action for the Agenda 2030, the progress of the strategic plan of UN Women that will be adopted in September is particularly important as a comprehensive tool to focus action on gender equality and empowerment of women in a broader sense of the word. We welcome the information on the strategic positions of UN Women to identify the most critical challenges and positions, such as, also just to mention some of them, the coordination with other entities, the field action-oriented strategy, the human rights and peace-centered approach, and the inclusion of civil society to build back better, forward, greener. From Andorra perspective, achieving gender equality is of utmost importance, both internationally through cooperation action and internally as a work in permanent progress and advances. In that way, I have to say that our government is completely paritarian. We have a Secretary of State for Equality, an observatory of equality as well, and a will of law for an effective equality between women and men has been drafted already. Let me just to say, to mention that even we are under exceptional circumstances, we will prefer for an effective multilateral system interpretation in these meetings that could be included if it's possible. To conclude, Mr. President, our message is of full support to UN Women as a global and collective voice of women and men. And we're looking forward to engaging in the global synergy for leaving no one behind, not a single woman, not a single girl. Thank you very much for your attention.
I thank the distinguished permanent representative of Andorra for her comments. I now give the floor to His Excellency, Mr. Pedro Luis Pedroso Cuesta, the permanent representative of Cuba. You have the floor, Excellency.
Thank you, Mr. President. My PR couldn't be here today, so I'm going to deliver the statement on his behalf. At the outset, I would like to congratulate you and the Bureau for your election. I would like also to reiterate our appreciation to UN Women for the effort throughout these challenging times. UN Women has been a strong voice for addressing the socioeconomic consequences of the COVID-19 on the life of women and girls around the world, and the integration of gender perspective in the response to and recovery from the pandemic. Before the pandemic, we already lived in an unequal world, determined by unjust and order that protect the wealth of the rich while reproduce the exclusion of the poor. COVID-19 has demonstrated these inequalities suffered by millions of women and girls around the world and has exacerbated them. Women are overrepresented in frontline workers, health personnel, and informal sector. In many countries, women are still paid less than men for equal work and hold less secure jobs. They are 39% of global employment, but account for 54% of job losses. These figures are eloquent enough. If we want to change that reality and realize the moral imperative of gender equality and the empowerment of women, further commitment is needed. In that endeavor, UN Women will be fundamental, and the strategic plan to 2022-25 should contribute to that goal. The elaboration of the strategic plan should take into account the national realities and context of developing countries. Its implementation at country level should be pursued in full consultation with national authorities. But UN Women and its new strategic plan will not be enough. Further international cooperation and solidarity is a must, in particular towards developing countries which will carry the heaviest burden of the pandemic. Multilateralism is required to foster an international enabled environment that is conducive to social and economic development. Unilateral coercive measures with their severe toll on the human rights and well-being of women and girls are contrary to that spirit. Countries under these measures, mine included, face additional obstacles to respond to and recover from the pandemic. The United States blockade against Cuba, strengthened without precedence in the midst of COVID-19, is the main obstacle to our socioeconomic development and constitutes a gross violation of the human rights of our people, including women and girls. Nevertheless, we will continue advancing in the area of gender equality despite the effects of the blockade, and we will continue supporting the efforts of UN Women and the international community to respond to and recover from the pandemic in a manner that builds a just world for all, including women and girls. Thank you so much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Cuba for her comments. I now give the floor to Excellency Andres. So I take that back. Her Excellency Ms. Alicia Buenrostro of Mexico. Mexico, you have the floor. Mexico. Okay, then we move on to...
Here I am.
Perfect. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mexico welcomes a comprehensive presentation of the Executive Director. We commend the crucial role that UN Women has played in assuring a gender-responsive and women's human rights approach to the global COVID-19 pandemic response. It is clear that since the outset, the pandemic has had devastating impacts on women and girls, reversing the progress achieved in the last decades towards gender equality and dramatically affecting those groups of women and girls who experience multiple and intersecting forms of discrimination and violence. It is time to take bold action and double our efforts, as these coming years will define our collective success in achieving the Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. We are deeply concerned of the dramatic increase of sexual and gender-based violence worldwide as a result of the lockdowns, social distance measures, and movement restrictions. The sustained rollback on women's sexual and reproductive health rights including their bodily autonomy, is alarming too. However, there is not much we can change unless we address the root causes, especially gender-biased norms that restrict women's and girls' rights and hinder their access to empowerment opportunities and resources. Even though women and girls have paid the highest price of this world crisis, yet their mental health and psychosocial needs remain overlooked and underserved, especially in humanitarian settings and conflict-affected countries. We ask UN Women to include this as a priority component in its new strategic plan 2022-25. Finally, I would like to express our sincere gratitude to UN Women in the preparation of the Generation Equality Forum that will take place this year in Mexico and in France under the leadership of civil society. As a global multi-stakeholder movement, the forum seeks systematic and transformative change to accelerate the implementation of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action in the world affected by COVID-19. With civil society at its core, the forum in Mexico next month will ensure a human rights approach as well as an intergenerational and intersectional representation, amplifying the voice of the feminism, youth, and grassroots movements. It will promote high-level political commitments and the urgent actions required to achieve gender equality. In the coming days, we will be sharing further information and logistics details with all member states. And as the world initiates the COVID-19 recovery path, we should wonder what shape will the post-pandemic recovery be. The time is now to act if we want to build back better, a more equal, resilient, and sustainable world. And let's not forget that the world can only be built with a feminist lens. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of Mexico for her comments. I now give the floor to Excellency Andres Urqueles, Deputy Permanent Representative of Colombia. You have the floor, Excellency.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and congratulate you for your election. Under the unprecedented circumstances of the COVID-19, Colombia reaffirms its full support to the agency. Women have been the most affected by the pandemic from a socioeconomic perspective. Major efforts and resources should be put in place to build back better and tackle the loss of jobs, the unbalanced distribution of care, and the increasing domestic violence. We want to highlight the commitment of UN Women to the United Nations Development System reform process. Women empowerment and gender equality should be placed at the center of the 2030 agenda. They should remain as a paramount cross-cutting issue in the Sustainable Development Cooperation frameworks. The role of the organization is pivotal to this endeavor, which will require the successful implementation of the QCPR resolution and the continuous enhancement of the coordination among agencies. Through the mobilization of strategic partnerships, empowerment can also be increased, reinforcing interventions on productive projects, care, and solidarity economy. Mr. President, last January 7th, Colombia and UN Women signed the country program for 21-24. This was adopted according to the guidelines of the United Nations Development System reform, optimizing the use of resources, allowing a specialized approach for interventions in the territories and focusing on delivering results. The program gives special relevance to the economic empowerment of women. Furthermore, it helps to close information gaps in statistics, to assess progress in the implementation of the SDGs, to fight against violence, and to help migrants. In that regard, I would like to highlight the recent announcement by President Duque regarding the temporarily protective legal status that Colombia will provide to the 1.7 million Venezuelan migrants that are living in our country. This policy allows the Venezuelan migrants to exercise legal activities and to benefit from the social protection from the state. It is a historic decision in favor of the most vulnerable, especially women. It shows a deep sense of solidarity and courage. To conclude, Colombia is committed to work closely with the agency to successfully implement the program and to achieve a transformative outcome during the strategic plan consultation process. Women agenda is on our hearts. It is a national priority. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished representative of Colombia for his comments and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Kenya, Excellency Jambi Kinyongo. You have the floor, Excellency.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you for giving me the floor. And once again, we congratulate you and the Vice President on your election. I would also like to thank Ms. Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka, the USG and Executive Director of UN Women, for her insightful statement and leadership of the entity. We convey our deep appreciation to you for your update on the COVID-19 response and upcoming actions and events. Madam Executive Director, we commend UN Women for the progress made in the 2018 to 2021 strategic plan and its 5 outcomes based on the midterm review. We hope to see improvement in those areas where targets were not met, despite the immense negative impact and challenges posed by the COVID-19 pandemic, including recovery from COVID-19. We reaffirm our commitment to working with the UN Women and member states in the implementation of the strategic plan for 2022 to 2025 towards the fulfillment of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action and Sustainable Development Goals, especially goal number 5. We welcome the Executive Director's commitment to ensure increased synergies, coherence, and collaboration with other UN programs and agencies. Mr. President, this past year, the COVID-19 pandemic has stalled progress towards the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. UN Women, together with all member states, must concentrate on COVID-19 relief efforts and lessening this growing divide and regaining progress lost, especially in developing and the least developed countries. Kenya appreciates the commendable work done by the UN Women Regional Office in Kenya in promoting gender equality, eradication of gender-based violence, and empowerment of women. Kenya will continue to work with the regional office in strengthening regional cooperation and capacity building. And I would like here to state that through the partnership with UN Women, Kenya has achieved success in response to COVID-19, for example, the establishment of gender-based violence recovery centers, as well as the launch of the Kenya National Action Plan on Women, Peace and Security, 2020 to 2024, to implement the UN Security Council Resolution 1325, just to name a few. Mr. President, as we embark on the upcoming discussions for the Strategic Plan 2022 to 2025, we would like to commend UN Women for continually prioritizing the eradication of poverty and inequality as an indispensable element for sustainable development and one of the underlying objectives of the operational activities of the United Nations Development System. We encourage UN Women to take into account the lessons learned from the 2018 to 2021 strategic plan, in line with General Assembly Resolution 72/279 on the repositioning of the United Nations Development System and the QCPR adopted in 2020 by the General Assembly. I would like to end by reiterating that the government of Kenya remains committed to the achievement of gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls. We look forward to working with UN Women and the Bureau towards creating a world where nobody is left behind and all women can thrive. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Kenya for her comment. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Turkey, Excellency Serhat Bali. You have the floor, Excellency.
Thank you so much, Mr. President. At the outset, I would like to extend our congratulations to you for your election as the President of the Executive Board. You and your bureau can be assured of my delegation's full support in carrying out your important task. We extend our appreciation to the outgoing president and the bureau members for their support throughout last year. Furthermore, I would like to thank Madam Executive Director for her comprehensive statement this morning and extend our appreciation for her steadfast efforts at the helm of UN Women. Mr. President, the past year was supposed to be a landmark year for gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls around the world. However, 2020 came with its unique challenges. The COVID-19 pandemic that started as a global health emergency soon turned into a human crisis that knows no national borders, affecting all segments of society. The challenge prior to COVID have been further aggravated by the pandemic, and the gains made in many areas in the last decades have been at risk of being rolled back. We are pleased to see that despite the complications of the pandemic, the UN Women continued its work and fully implemented its mandates. We thank UN Women staff for their tireless efforts both in New York and in field offices. Clearly, this was by no means an easy task. We also appreciate the report on UN Women Global Response to COVID-19, which gives an extensive account of UN Women's response in different areas such as data, ending violence against women and girls, economic resilience, as well as UN Women's contribution to the whole UN system's response to the pandemic. Mr. President, the upcoming strategic plan presents an important opportunity to foster UN Women's role as the powerhouse on gender equality. We commend UN Women's efforts to ensure that the strategic plan preparations are guided by the 4 key principles set forth last year, namely to keep plan relevant, evidence-based, highly consultative, and coordinated. We would like to express our support for an ambitious strategic plan, which gives impetus to the work of the UN Women in implementing its triple mandate. Mr. President, we look forward to the deliberations in the 65th session of the Commission on the Status of Women that will be held next month. Turkey plans to attend the session with a high-level representation. In closing, Mr. President, allow me to assure you of Turkey's strong engagement and constructive contributions to the work of the UN Women Executive Board throughout the year. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Turkey for his comment, and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Lithuania, Excellency Ridas Petkus, to take the floor. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. First of all, let me start by congratulating you and the other members of the Bureau of the UN Women Executive Board for your election. Certainly, we do pledge our full support and cooperation with you and the other members of the Bureau. And if I may, everyone hoped that the year 2020 would be the year for gender equality, marking the 25th anniversary of the Beijing Declaration, the 20th anniversary of Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace and security, and as well as the first year of the decade of action on the Sustainable Development Goals. The year of gender equality turned out to be the year of 2 devastating pandemics, COVID-19 and the shadow pandemic, infecting the very fragile progress in human rights of all women and girls, deepening the pre-existing inequalities, exposing vulnerabilities in social, political, and economical systems. Since the very start of the pandemic, women have been fighting on the front lines of the response as healthcare workers, teachers, essential staff. Women leaders have shown an exemplary dealing with the pandemics, as countries led by women were less affected and had quicker recovery. Sadly, but research shows that women have lost their jobs due to the impact of COVID-19 more than men, making up almost 2/5 of the global working force. As usually carrying the highest burden of housework, they were the ones who had the greatest epidemic-related costs due to school closures and the health risks posed to elderly family members. COVID-19 also caused an unprecedented increase in all forms of violence against women and girls, both offline and online, including in domestic violence. Lithuania was not an exception, as numbers of domestic violence in Lithuania have increased at least 20%, not to mention the unreported cases. I hope what the hardship of tackling the pandemic and the exposed injustice and inequalities encourage us to reconsider the way we want our societies to look like. During the pandemic, we have seen exemplary women leadership. We once again witnessed the importance of civil society partners, women's rights organizations in fighting the gender-based violence, providing multifaceted assistance. We have seen the EU and United Nations joint initiative Spotlight expanding further. In Lithuania, the end of 2020 was highlighted by the new government with 6 out of 14 women ministers, together with the prime minister and the head of parliament, who are also women. We need to use this momentum and double our efforts in making gender equality the guiding principle. We must continue to strengthen our social frameworks as well as legal ones and ensure full, effective and accelerated implementation of international commitments with regard to gender equality, taking into account the needs of all women and girls, including those facing multiple and intersecting forms of violence and discrimination. On this occasion, the UN Women Executive Board first regular session in 2021, Lithuania would like to thank the UN Women for its tremendous work during the pandemic and its efforts of promoting gender equality as one of the core elements of the global COVID-19 response. Lithuania is strongly committed to working together and building better in the pursuit of equal and inclusive future for all women and girls. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished representative of Lithuania for his comment. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea, Excellency Bai Jong-in. Please, you have the floor. Excellency.
Thank you, President and Executive Director. My delegation commends UN Women's advocacy in protecting and empowering women and girls, and welcomes UN Women's ongoing efforts to forge impactful progress through its work during the COVID-19 pandemic. Commemorating the 30 years anniversary of its membership in the UN this year, Korea is committed to revitalize the engagement with UN system entities, especially UN Women, in support of results for women and girls. We look forward to being a positive force in shaping UN Women's upcoming strategic plan. Against this backdrop, my delegation wishes to highlight the following. First, while overcoming the challenges of the pandemic, we must take a step forward to build communities where all members are equal, live safely, and take care of each other. It is absolutely timely to have a focused discussion on women's participation in public life and the elimination of violence against women in the forthcoming CSW. This theme builds upon the guiding principles of Strategic Plan 2018, that progress in one area leverages achievements in another, as preventing violence against women contributes to their enhanced participation in public life and vice versa. We look forward to seeing meaningful and, as was stressed by Executive Director this morning, bold results from the ongoing discussions. Second, quality policy requires robust knowledge as well as accurate data. UN Women's knowledge products have proved influential in policymaking, domestically and globally, for gender mainstreaming. We are working with the UN Women for the establishment of the UN Women Knowledge Center in my country. It will contribute to reinforcing UN Women's current network of knowledge and expertise, and to linking global, regional, and national policy development. Third, across the triple nexus of humanitarian, peace, and development efforts, we collectively must ensure the delivery of essential services to women and girls in conflict areas and women's participation in the peace process. We are committed to presenting a platform for visible progress in our peacekeeping ministerial to be held in December and working with the UN Women for concrete change and immediate action. In closing, I would like to reiterate my government's firm commitment to supporting UN Women's efforts to accelerate the achievement of results for women and girls. And as the President mentioned this morning, this year is an important year for our common endeavor, and we should make it so. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea for his comment, and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the United States, Excellency Ms. Courtney Nimrod. Excellency, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and congratulations on your election. I'd also like to extend the U.S. government's condolences to the UN Secretariat and our colleagues broadly in the system on the passing of Peg Snyder. As a trailblazer in the multilateral system to champion the rights of women, Peg's legacy shines brightly. The United States is committed to supporting the UN Women agenda and to bring a strong partnership in this forum in the coming years. Women's rights are human rights. The UN and the international community must redouble our efforts to promote and protect the human rights of all women and girls. In this collective effort, UN Women's global leadership is more critical than ever. We face unprecedented challenges around the globe, exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, especially in the areas of combating violence against women and seeking to fully protect the rights of women and girls belonging to multiple marginalized groups. On January 28th, President Joseph R. Biden issued a presidential memorandum on protecting women's health at home and abroad, which sets out that the U.S. federal government, quote, must take action to ensure that women at home and around the world are able to access complete medical information, including with respect to their reproductive health, unquote. This presidential memorandum represents part of the Biden-Harris administration's broader efforts and commitment to protect women's health, including but not limited to sexual and reproductive health care and gender equality, as well as addressing gender-based violence at home and around the world. The United States has also re-engaged with the World Health Organization and has pledged to join COVAX. We will work in partnership to ensure the international community can move swiftly to address the current crisis by supporting the multilateral and equitable distribution of safe and effective vaccines, without undermining incentives for innovation and doing what we can to help address the enormous socioeconomic impacts of the pandemic. The United States believes we are stronger when we work with our partners and friends through strengthened and revitalized multilateral institutions. In the coming year, the United States commits to revitalized engagement with UN Women and to collective partnership with member states. Madam Executive Director, we welcome your vision for a UN Women 2.0, particularly your focus on impact, partnership, and performance, including a focus on strengthening UN Women's governance and oversight and advancing organizational leadership and best management practices, including through inclusivity, diversity, training, and talent management. We welcome UN Women's focus in the next strategic plan on strengthening partnerships with civil society. All stakeholders, particularly civil societies, play a critical role in advancing UN Women's priorities and for helping UN Women fulfill its mandate of achieving gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. The United States commends UN Women's commitment to impact, partnership, and performance and strengthening UN Women's governance and oversight. We also encourage UN Women to use its next strategic plan to further efforts to prevent sexual exploitation and sexual abuse and harassment. In closing, I'd like to reiterate that the U.S. is committed to supporting UN Women and to being a strong partner in the forum in the coming years. We will do all we can to ensure that the future is better and brighter for all of us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished representative of the United States for her comment, and now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Rwanda, His Excellency Robert Kainamaro. You have the floor, Excellency.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I join the rest to congratulate you, and you can count on Rwanda for full support. Mr. President, we also commend the work of UN Women, the entire leadership, and the able leadership of the Madam Executive Director for the commendable work done in 2020, although they were executing it under unimaginable challenges and circumstances that befell all of us. Mr. President, the pandemic has shown how something that is very central to our health impacts economy, education, and the environment. It is this interconnected reality of our world that underlines the necessity of interconnectedness in our international organizations and support each other, and looking ahead even in the next strategic plan that we'll be discussing today. Mr. President, just as in the landmark resolution 1325, it ties together women, peace and security, human rights, dignity, and empowerment. Our responses to these unique challenges of women must bring together economic, social, and cultural solutions. In light of this, Mr. President, partnership, as most have said, remains more important today than ever before. And I join others who encourage UN Women to team up with financial institutions and other stakeholders to strengthen their reach in this upcoming strategic year. Mr. President, Rwanda remains committed to the work of UN, and will remain to work together with UN Women to advance common agenda and interests to make sure that no one is left behind. Mr. President, to conclude and to be in brief, last week, Mr. President, we've celebrated International Day of Girls in Science. Every year, as we celebrate that day, we remember that the success of a woman and girl cannot be confined to one day or one initiative or one strategic plan. Women's empowerment runs deep through the cultural and society veins of our nations, and we encourage UN Women to continue in that direction, as in providing the resources that are very necessary, but not only limit yourself to resources, but also provide or support countries to provide the circumstances that allow the development every day. Mr. President, finally, in Rwanda, we have the emancipation, education, and empowerment of women at the very core of our development process, with high representation of women in the judiciary, female majority in the parliament, and women rising stars in the ascent industries. We understand that what is good for women is good for our society. Our country has benefited from the nuance of national plan tuned to these cultural and societal pulses, and we encourage again UN Women to maintain this bottom-up specificity in attaining priority for all women every day, every hour, and everywhere. I thank you very much. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Rwanda for his comment, and I'll call on the distinguished delegate from China, Mr. Jiang Kungo, to take the floor. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. At the outset, China congratulates you, His Excellency Dr. Ali Kaba, to be elected as the president of this bureau, and also to chair this very first meeting. We also express our appreciation for the opening remarks by the Madam Under Secretary General. COVID-19 pandemic affects everyone, everywhere, but it affects different groups of people differently, deepening existing inequalities. Women are hit hardest. In response to the pandemic and in the work for recovery, we must adopt gender-sensitive approach. In this regard, we commend UN Women for its active role in supporting women and girls to fight against the pandemic, including strengthening economic resilience, ending violence against women, promoting women empowerment. It is also essential for UN Women to continue its support to developing countries in post-COVID recovery. The COVID-19 is not only challenging global health systems, but also testing our common humanity. With rising numbers of COVID cases and deaths, it is the utmost important and urgent to make the vaccine a global public good and ensure the equitable access for women and girls. With regard to the 2022 and 2025 strategic plan, China supports its development and will actively participate in the consultation process. Such a strategic plan should help UN Women to better carry forward its triple mandates. In view of the Decade for Action of the SDGs and also post-COVID reality for women, the new strategic plan should be a development-centered plan of action with special focus on women in developing countries. We support UN Women to strengthen the synergy with other UN entities within their respective mandates. It is also important for UN Women to build a strong partnership with international financing institutions. The reforms of the UN development system offer a unique opportunity to leverage the new resident coordinator systems to amplify UN Women's work and mandates. Last year, the President Xi Jinping participated in Beijing Plus 25 high-level meeting and announced the financial contribution of $10 million to UN Women. Gender equality are essential to getting through this pandemic together, to recovering faster, and to building a better future for everyone. China is firmly committed to support UN Women and work with all partners in implementing Beijing Declaration and Plan of Action. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the distinguished delegate from China for his comment. I now give the floor to the distinguished delegate of Morocco, Ms. Majda Much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. And at the outset, I would like to congratulate you for your election, as well as your bureau, and to thank Madam Fanzile Nguka, Executive Director of UN Women, for her able leadership. Quickly, Mr. Chair, I would like to highlight the following points. First, we would like to commend UN Women's Secretariat and staff, whether in the headquarters or in the field, striving to continue to deliver their programs despite the challenges linked to the pandemic. Second, the year 2020 showed many shortcomings relating to the full respect and fulfillment of all the human rights and fundamental freedoms of all women and girls. We are particularly concerned that many of the achievements hardly gained during the last years will be at stake, particularly regarding assuring the return of girls to schools after the pandemic and ensuring psychological support to women and girls who underwent violence during the pandemic. Third, the strategic plan and its directions, goals, and strategic approaches are essential to support efforts to achieve gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls by 2030. We call on strong commitments. This will define our common success in building back better and achieving gender equality by 2030. Fourth, Morocco will spare no efforts to continue its activism and mobilization to support women and girls' empowerment and to end all forms of violence against them. As a concrete step here in New York to women empowerment, the permanent mission of Morocco has proudly now a total of 10 women diplomats and 5 men diplomats. Also, as another example of our commitment in ending violence against women, back in April last year, in the midst of the spikes recorded in the global report of violence against women and girls during the lockdowns due to COVID-19, and right after the Secretary General's appeal for peace at home and in homes around the world, Morocco did not hesitate 1 second to join efforts with the European Union, Argentina, Mongolia, Namibia, New Zealand, and Turkey and led together joint statements in support of the SG's appeal, signed by a wide range of UN member states and observers, calling for immediate action to address the rise of gender-based and domestic violence under COVID-19. Later in December 2020, the same core group launched the Group of Friends for the Elimination of Violence Against Women and Girls. Finally, Mr. Chair, and with approaching the next CSW and the elaboration of the strategic plan, we call on strong commitments of member states and flexibility in the different consultations taking place now. We call on joint collaboration with stakeholders, including representatives of civil society, as they play a key role. And we finally call on strengthening financial resources to UN Women to support its leadership role around the world on gender issues. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished delegate from Morocco for her comment. I now give the floor to the distinguished delegate from Chile, Mr. Jorge Vidal. Have the floor.
Thank you, Chair. Excellence, dear colleagues, Madam Executive Director. I thank you for their statements as well as the UN Women Secretary for facilitating and organizing this first annual session of UN Women Executive Board. Chile recognizes the tireless and proactive work of UN Women in responding to the health, social, and economic impacts of the pandemic in the life of women around the world. Its data and statistics-based approach that proved its efficiency by delivering targeted programs and policy recommendations based on women's needs in different contexts. This year, among many relevant activities, the Executive Board is tasked with elaborating the 2022-25 strategic plan. Much has been said about building back better. Therefore, it is important to recognize that the elaboration of this coming strategic plan is an opportunity to do so. The task at hand is more encompassing than to respond to the most immediate needs of women to adjust and be empowered to build a productive life in the post-pandemic context, or to support gender-focused policies and women's meaningful engagement in the response and recovery efforts from the pandemic to set the way forward. The long-term contribution of this plan should aim to anticipate and set the ground for ambitious, result-oriented goals that would allow the United Nations systems, member states, and women themselves to take the necessary steps forward to achieve SDG 5 in this decade of action. Additionally, Chile looks forward to exploring ways in which the work and implementation of the Generation Equality Forum and its action coalitions can be brought into this strategic plan, as it represents a practical and innovative mechanism to ensure the action-oriented coordination of the work of UN Women, private sector, civil society, and member states, as well as its implementation and oversight. The situation of women cannot be properly addressed without confronting root causes, negative social norms, and the systems of inequality and discrimination that prevent them from fully enjoying their rights, participating meaningfully in the public life, and have a say in the big tables where decisions, as well as those that enable violence at all levels against women. In this regard, Chile believes the next strategic plan should be tailored toward achieving equal rights, duties, and obligations for women and men, fighting violence against women, climate change, strengthening and advising women's economic autonomy, promote women's leadership and women in decision-making positions, as well as supportive policies to foster an environment where women's economic and social empowerment is enabled. This includes through the enhancement, for example, of accessible child care services, flexible work schedules, and increasing the accessibility of women to the digital and financial literacy. Lastly, we would like to highlight the remarkable work plan of Chile's UN Women Office, which during the last year has conducted several projects to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic's impact on women and has provided guidance and technical capabilities to ensure continuity of vital services for women during the lockdown. all this while also supporting the Human Rights Ministry to strengthen a gendered approach to policing services. We assure you, UN Women has Chile's full support, particularly in the initial outline document of the strategic plan, and we look forward to continue working constructively with the work of the Executive Board in this year to come. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate from Chile for his comments. I now give the floor to the distinguished delegate from the Russian Federation, Ms. Guzal Kusanova. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. At the outset, let me thank the Executive Director for opening statement and congratulate the Bureau for its election. Mr. President, due to COVID-19 outbreak, last year became challenging for the entire UN system. However, UN Women and its Executive Board have managed to conduct the work in an efficient manner for the benefit of women around the world, their family, and community. Yet, COVID-19 should not be used as an excuse for the promotion of so-called reverse progress or pushback, which are ambiguous concepts that were used by some even before the pandemic. The new notion of so-called shadow pandemic is also misleading, as there is a need for reliable data from every country to make such conclusion, and not just general statement on the situation in some countries which have already been known for high numbers of violence against women. As for the progress in the implementation of the Beijing Declaration Platform for Action, it is there if you compare to where we started. It might slow down due to the coronavirus disease, but can hardly be reversed. Having said that, we take note of the contribution of UN Women to the UN COVID-19 response under the leadership of WHO. We would like to stress one more time that the support of UN Women to the efforts of other UN entities and specialized agencies has to be conducted within its mandate on achieving gender equality and empowering women. The assistance to member states also needs to be provided upon the request of the concerned country, while respecting the principle of national ownership and bearing in mind national realities and priorities. Mr. President, we take note of the efforts of UN Women within the UN reform. We would like to remind the QCPR was voted, and the Russian Federation made reservations at its adoption, including on one of the paragraphs on gender equality. UN Women should take this into account while implementing the provisions of QCPR. Mr. President, last year we celebrated the 25th anniversary of the adoption of the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, which remained the roadmap to achieve gender equality and empower women. We're seriously concerned by the attempts of some member states and UN Women to review these documents, which is being done outside of the intergovernmental processes. We have been continuously pointing out that the Generation Equality Forum takes us further from consensual and widely supported approaches and policies, the agenda on gender equality. This initiative has not been supported by the entire UN membership. Neither was it mandated by any of the intergovernmental processes. The Generation Equality Forum and its action coalitions are aimed at dividing member states and at adding more controversy in the discussions we have in the UN. The recent division on gender equality issues in ECOSOC General Assembly and the Security Council is clear illustration of the damage of imposing someone's visions on others when there is no consensus on an issue. Mr. President, as this year we need to endorse the strategic plan 2022-2025, it is of utmost importance to exclude controversial terms, notions, and concepts. We have continuously expressed our disappointment with the terminology used in the reports of UN Women, which was not in line with the ones agreed within the intergovernmental processes. We hope that it will not happen in the next strategic plan, as we believe that it has to be endorsed by the membership in a timely manner, which might not happen if there is something in it that member states cannot support. In conclusion, Mr. President, the Russian Federation will continue its constructive engagement with UN Women in order to come up with a strong and focused strategic plan to achieve genuine gender equality around the world and Goal 5 on gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegate from the Russian Federation for her comment. I now give the floor to the distinguished delegate from Saudi Arabia, Ms. Mona Saleh Ogande. You have the floor.
Hello.
Yes, you have the floor.
Good morning. Mr. President, Excellencies, I'll have the honor to deliver this statement on behalf of His Excellency Ambassador Abdullah Al-Maalimi. First, allow me to congratulate you and other members for your election, and we assure you in Women our commitment as a partner in alignment with our internal laws during this difficult year and the coming years to work closely, continuously, and constructively on advancing all women and girls. Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has gone through significant socio-economic historic reforms to advance women economic empowerment and gender equality that continued to take place to strengthen women and girls economically during the challenges exacerbated by COVID-19 pandemic. The Kingdom made consistent efforts to implement historic reforms that qualified it as the top reformer and improver among 190 economics in the World Bank's Women, Business and the Law 2020 report. It worked on advancing Saudi women by taking up a package of legislative reforms, specifically in the areas of women's mobility, workplace, entrepreneurship, and pension. Mr. President, Saudi Arabia further criminalized sexual harassment in public and private sector workplaces by enacting legislation and criminal penalties to protect women from gender discrimination and sexual harassment. It also encouraged women's entrepreneurship by implementing legal amendments aimed to protect women from discrimination in employment, including prohibiting gender-based discrimination from accessing financial services and dismissing women during their pregnancy and maternity leave. Pension equality is one of the most important reforms implemented by equalizing the retirement ages for women and men at 60 years, extending women's working lives, payments, benefits, and contributions to the national economy. These ongoing reforms aim to advance the role of women in leadership and have enabled women to assume high positions in the public and private sectors and flourish professionally. As a result, Saudi women have been taken leading and high positions in the country as ministers, ambassadors, chairwomen, and members of the Saudi Shura Council. Mr. President, Excellencies, last but not least, we find it important to mention that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia implemented these bold historic reforms to indicate that Saudi women play a vital role in moving Saudi Arabia closer to its Vision 2030 and the Kingdom's commitment to expanding economic opportunities to all citizens, notably women and girls. Thank you very much.
I thank the distinguished delegate from Saudi Arabia for her comment. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the EU, the European Union, Silvio Gonzatti. You have the floor.
Thank you, President, and congratulations for your elections. I'm speaking on behalf of the EU as a donor, and a full statement will be submitted in writing. I wanted to thank the Executive Director for mentioning the EU as one of your key partners and supporters. Our cooperation, in fact, does span the globe. And we've been working together to make a difference in girls' and women's lives in Africa, Latin America, Caribbean, Asia, and the Pacific, and also in the regions around the European Union. In more than 80 countries, together with UN Women, we've been fighting to end all forms of violence against women and girls, particularly through the EU-UN Spotlight initiatives, which has been mentioned by several colleagues during this meeting. But let me also commend your organizations, Ms. Ponzile, for not just what you do on the ground, and there we really try to support you, but also for the policy advice and policy advocacy that you do also here in New York. And in particular, I would like to mention the Committee on the Status of Women, but also the work you do in the context of the Generation Equality Forum, where we are also engaged as co-leaders in one of the coalitions. And there we expect that the meetings in Mexico and Paris will be an opportunity to promote the comprehensive and multi-sectoral approach which we've been spearheading through the Spotlight initiatives. But you can't make advocacy without data. And so there, again, I would like to thank your organization for the fact that you've been documenting the severe impact that the pandemic has had, the COVID-19 pandemic has had on women and girls, and highlighting the important role that women have in the response and the recovery. Obviously, our common vision of gender equality and the elimination of all forms of violence against women and girls is not accomplished, and UN Women's next strategic plan will be crucial. In this respect, I wanted to say that there is also opportunity to work more closely together, because we are in the process now of defining a new financial and programming cycle at EU level, and that offers a great opportunity for shaping together our future cooperation and strategic engagement for the 2030 agenda. Let me conclude with a question that I know is a difficult one. I'd like to ask, about the challenges that you face in integrating the UN Women's normative agenda into the operational activities of the whole UN development system. Thank you very much.
Okay. Distinguished representative of the EU for his comments. With that, we have heard the last speaker on my list. I'll invite the Secretariat to respond.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I would like to ask my two DDs to respond on our behalf. Anita, will you start, and then Osa? Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank the member states for very affirming contribution and the encouragement that you've given us. It really means a lot to us. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Executive Director, and thank you also to our board chair. And thank you for the opportunity to respond to several of the comments. In the interest of time, Mr. Chair, if you would be agreeable, I would propose that since we have a discussion on our strategic plan as part of the agenda, that perhaps my colleague Osa and I could use that slot to respond to several of the issues that have been raised here. Would that be agreeable with you, Mr. Chair?
Yes, I think that's really good. So we have more time to really respond adequately to the rich discussions we've had so far.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you. So now we will move to item number 2 of the agenda on Joint United Nations and HIV/AIDS Program Coordinating Board meeting. Please allow me to welcome Madam Zile Lambo-Goke again, Under Secretary General and Executive Director of UN Women, back to the virtual podium. And also allow me to warmly welcome Madam Winnie Yan-Ima, Under Secretary General of the United Nations and Executive Director of UNAIDS. I also welcome back to the virtual podium the following UN Women colleagues: Deputy Executive Director Osa Renya, Deputy Executive Director Anita Bhatia, and Nazneen Damji, Policy Advisor, Gender Equality and Health and HIV, and Sarah Hendricks, Director of Policy Program and Intergovernmental Divisions. I would first like to invite the Executive Director of UN Women for introductory remarks, followed by remarks by the Executive Director of UNAIDS. Madam Executive Director, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, Excellencies. I would also like to greet the Executive Director of UNAIDS and welcome her again. It's wonderful to have her in our midst. In many ways, we could say that we've made significant advances in the fight against HIV and AIDS. We also know that if it was not for some of the setbacks that we see as a result of COVID, we would have been able to accelerate our fight even as a follow-up to 25 years of Beijing, as well as the work that is being done by all the other parties and co-sponsors of UNAIDS, but well, I mean, of the AIDS agenda. But we are here now with this pandemic, but we're determined not to give up. Gender-based violence is on the rise. We know that gender-based violence, especially when it comes to young girls, tends to increase the infections. So the work that we're doing on fighting gender-based violence in the context of COVID has to be also the fight in the context of gender-based violence and its impact on HIV and AIDS. We also know that while women constitute 70% of health workers and health workforce, they are, however, not well represented at the leadership level. In our work against HIV and AIDS, that fight for better representation of women is a win for the fight against HIV and AIDS. We had the vision of ending AIDS by 2030. I am curious to hear from Executive Director of UNAIDS about what she sees as a strategy that we can adopt in order to try and keep to that vision. The engagement of young people very actively in this fight and community level engagement, I think gives us some hope that we can try and protect the gains that we have made. But I also don't want to simplify the challenges that we face. UN Women has made sure that gender equality is well integrated in the fight against HIV and AIDS and focus on young people. And thank you to the Executive Director, because she has strongly supported that approach. And she has also supported the emphasis on girls' education as one of the most reliable fights against HIV and AIDS, because when girls are at school, they tend to be very careful, much more careful about their sexual behavior, and they are able to navigate relatively better than those girls who are out of school and are more vulnerable. Let me leave it there, President, and I hope that we can hear a bit more from the Executive Director. Thank you.
Thank you, Executive Director. I now turn to Executive Director, Madam Winnie Byanyima. You have the Executive Director.
Thank you, Chair. Can you hear me?
Yes, clearly.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Kaba. I also thank my colleague, Executive Director Phumzile Mlambo-Chuka, for inviting me to join her at this year's first session of UN Women's Board meeting. I also take the opportunity to begin by paying tribute to Peg Snyder, who was my friend and mentor, the founding executive director of UNIFEM, the precursor of UN Women. I count myself as an old friend of UN Women, having been a member of a task team that facilitated the General Assembly in setting up UN Women. Since those early days, I'm so happy to see the transformation of this very important mechanism of the United Nations for promoting gender equality. I've seen UN Women grow its presence in countries, strong engagement with governments like never before, while maintaining enduring connections with civil society. I've seen it boldly embrace and work with the private sector without losing its soul, and engaging men and boys without dropping the ball on women and girls. I thank UN Women for remaining a leader and a voice for women's rights around the world on global issues and at the national level. Now, I want to speak about our work at UNAIDS. UN Women is a very important and active co-sponsor of the partnership, the joint partnership against AIDS. UN Women, as one of the 11 co-sponsors, plays its role on ensuring that the gender dimensions of HIV/AIDS are addressed. Now, the achievements of the movement of HIV are huge in the last 40 years, but the work is not yet done, sadly. I'm here to let you know, for example, that in sub-Saharan Africa, the face of HIV is still that of a young woman or a girl. That's unacceptable. So we need to mobilize in the next 10 years to achieve the SDG goal on ending AIDS by 2030. We have 10 years, we have to get it done. Through our consultations in making our new strategy, which we hope to be adopted in March, we found that human rights, gender equality, and community-led responses, those three things, must be the bedrock of a new strategy to move us to zero new infections and zero HIV deaths. Human rights, gender equality, and communities are key. So the role of UN Women continues to be a strong one within the partnership. Conscious that scientific innovations on their end will not end AIDS, our strategy is aiming to address the structural barriers that continue to fuel HIV, with an increased focus on the intersecting inequalities that women and girls face in their diversity. We prioritize people at risk, especially recognizing that unless we tackle harmful social norms, harmful gender norms, stigma, discrimination, criminalization, we won't end AIDS as a public health threat. We must enable adolescent girls and young women to exercise all their rights, including sexual and reproductive rights, with safety and dignity. We must shift policies, laws, and mindsets that are in the way of this transformation. The best work of the UN is when we build around the priorities of people and we work together as agencies. So I commend UNAIDS, UN Women, and suggest 4 important low-hanging fruits for us, strategic opportunities for us to take this agenda forward. 1, UN Women's leadership to bring to light and confront violence against women and girls is critical for this fight against HIV. So we will rally behind UN Women, UNFPA, and work to fight gender-based violence, sexual and gender-based violence. Second, we have a global partnership to eliminate all forms of stigma and discrimination that's HIV-related. It's now in 18 countries. We need to expand this and tackle discrimination. Third, we need to increase investments in women's and girls' leadership at the center of HIV responses and COVID responses and any future pandemic responses. Leadership. Fourth, I'm proud of this Education Plus initiative that ED Pumzile and 3 other EDs of UNFPA, UNESCO, and UNICEF are rallying behind in sub-Saharan Africa. It's intolerable, Chair, that 5 to 6 newly infected adolescents between the age of 15 and 19 in our region of Africa are girls, 5 out of 6. It's intolerable that 600 of our girls in Africa are newly infected every single day. Every day, 600 girls get infected with this deadly virus. AIDS is still the second leading cause of death among young women between age 15 and 24 in this region, leading cause of death. So we've identified, and this is my last point, Chair, that keeping girls in school, as Pumzile has just said, to the end of secondary school, even if it's a poor school, without good facilities, but being within the 4 walls of a classroom, reduces the risk by 50% to a young girl. And if you include other interventions like comprehensive sexuality education, like sexual and reproductive health and rights done in the right way for each group, like taking gender-based violence, sexual violence out of the school space, that risk reduces even further. So we are determined to work with governments from the rich countries, from the developing countries of Africa, to pull this together, to roll out, to support the rolling out of universal secondary education, and to put in the school space those policies that reduce the risk even further. We hope to launch this at the Generation Equality Forum in Paris. We count on the governments of the North and the South to be behind this new partnership to save our girls, keep our girls from new infections. And I need not say that staying in school not only reduces HIV infections, but has numerous other social and economic outcomes, like teenage pregnancies reduced, like high fertility rates reduced, like economic growth, and so on. So with those, I thank you, Chair, and for indulging me, for giving me the opportunity to speak to your board. And I look forward to stronger partnership, always growing together with UN Women. I'm very proud to associate with UN Women. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madam Executive Director. We appreciate your briefing and for your kind engagement with our board. I now give the floor for the presentation by the Deputy Executive Director, Renia. Please, Ms. Renia, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Mr. President, and thank you, Winnie, for these important words and messages to us. I would actually ask my team, because after this excellent introduction, I think that the first slides are actually redundant. So in the interest of time, Mr. President, I think we could start with slide number 8, where UN Women actually talks about what we do. ED Winnie has already spoken as the UN Women ED about the power structures we have to work against, about girls' situation and the fact that women and girls are unproportionately hit by HIV and AIDS and transmission because of power structures and inequalities. And also the fact that since COVID has exacerbated poverty and lack of income specifically for women, this makes our work even more urgent to support in every way we can through education and support to job opportunities. Also, on a personal note, in another capacity that I had before as the head of an NGO working specifically on sexual and reproductive health and rights, and to a large extent against HIV, AIDS, and in favor of people living with HIV and AIDS. It became very clear to me, it was a very important lesson for me to learn how much inequalities between countries and within countries, between groups and within groups, for example, in terms of gender, income differences, LGBT, sexual orientation and differences with LGBT people's rights, etc. The impact that had on the spread of the virus and also whether people were offered treatment in time or not. So it is very important also for us to work together with girls groups, women's movement, LGBT communities, etc. in everything that we do. And with that, I wanted to comment a bit more concretely in the interest of time, Mr. President, on what we do. And we always do that as a co-sponsor to UNAIDS and always in cooperation with UNAIDS and other agencies, as Winnie also pointed out, in order to be as relevant as possible and bring our added value. The work with men and boys also is very, very important here in order to change those both power structures and also the harmful practices that we spoke about. So a few highlights of our results. Over the past decade, UN Women has supported the integration of gender equality in national HIV responses in 48 countries. And that made approximately 13.5 million women, or we could 13.5 million women benefited from that work. One example of that is that through UN Women's support, in Ukraine's 2019 national HIV strategy, it emphasized improving women's and girls' access to HIV services and to reduce discrimination and stigma that Winnie alluded to as well. UN Women also promoted leadership of women living with HIV across 30 countries in 2018 and 19, with over 10,000 women living with HIV directly engaging in decision-making within HIV responses. One example of that is in Zimbabwe, where we set up a platform to formalize the engagement of women living with HIV in influencing the country's funding request to the Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis, and malaria. So this resulted in securing 20 million for 2020 to 2022 for programming on HIV in relation to adolescent girls and young women, so $20 million. UN Women also implemented community-level evidence-based initiatives to transform unequal gender norms and increase uptake of HIV testing and treatment, particularly among men. And one example of that is that through the He for She community-based initiative, 115,000 women and men were engaged in South Africa in dialogues on unequal gender norms and how to change them, violence against women, how to prevent it, and HIV prevention as a responsibility for both women and men. In 2 years, 62% of those who were engaged in these dialogues also got tested for HIV, and all of those who tested positive are now linked to HIV treatment and care. UN Women is also leveraging our strategic interagency partnership that we spoke about to advance the gender equality and women's empowerment agenda across the UN system. And both EDs alluded to that. UN Women are co-convening together with UNDP and UNAIDS, as well as with civil society, very important partner. In general, the Global Partnership for Action to Eliminate All Forms of HIV-related Stigma and Discrimination. And also, we heard about education, and we are really pleased that we can work together also with UNAIDS on the Education Plus initiative to end the HIV crisis among young women and girls in sub-Saharan Africa. The UNAIDS board decided, their decisions have called for better addressing the third zero of the UNAIDS strategy, zero discrimination. So in response, UN Women has taken up the co-convener role and investing in rolling out and the implementation of the Global Partnership for Action to Eliminate All Forms of HIV-related stigma and discrimination. Very, very important. And all of this is translated into global commitments and national and regional pledges when it comes to policies and programs. Also, the UNAIDS board provided guidance on the evaluation function and the recent independent evaluation of the UN system's response to HIV. So UN Women are really happy about the creation of the UNAIDS Evaluation Office, and we're pleased to learn that from UN Women's programming, that our programming has informed the independent evaluation of the UN system response to AIDS and its management's response. We embrace these fundings, and we will continue to work through this new knowledge to realize always better and improved gender transformative HIV intervention set. UN Women has also actively engaged in all stages of development of the new global AIDS strategy beyond 2021. And we really appreciate the strong decision point adopted at the December board of UNAIDS, which called for an ambitious results area on gender equality, as well as gender responsive actions, and also indicators and resources within the new UNAIDS results and resources framework. So going forward, lastly, Mr. President, UN Women is committed to continue this role and to lead on gender equality and gender-based violence in the UN AIDS Division of Labor, and are committed to adhering to the revised co-sponsorship principles agreed by all heads of agencies and welcomed by the UN AIDS board last December. And also UN Women's contribution to the global AIDS response lays a good ground for amplifying this work in the development of the new UN Women's Strategic Plan, which we will discuss later today. And important for us all the time is to provide and apply a gender lens and gender responsive actions in relation to policies, programs, budgets, and so on. So also, as you are gearing up for the UN General Assembly high-level meeting of HIV/AIDS in June in 2021. So we call on member states' support to ensure that the global commitments on gender equality and the empowerment of all women are prioritized, and that we can draw on the evidence of the Beijing 25 review that many of you alluded to earlier, as well as the CSW resolution from the CSW 60, so 60/2 on the girl child and HIV. So we are committed to continuing our work on this, always doing so together with civil society, with girls and women's representatives and human rights defenders, as well as representatives of women and girls living with HIV and AIDS. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rainer. I now open the floor for member states' intervention with respect to item 2. Kindly use the raise hand function to indicate your interest to intervene. Jean-Luc, is there any?
Mr. President, I see no hand raised yet. I would encourage all delegation to raise their hand now if they want to speak, please. Thank you. I think the UK wants the floor, if that's correct.
United Kingdom, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am pleased to deliver the statement on behalf of the following 21 member states: Andorra, Australia, Austria, Belgium, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Bulgaria, Canada, Denmark, Finland, Georgia, Ireland, Israel, Japan, Kingdom of the Netherlands, Luxembourg, Mexico, Norway, Sweden, Switzerland, the United States, and my own country, the United Kingdom. We thank UN Women for their presentation. The presentation clearly highlights the stark reality facing women in the context of HIV and AIDS. COVID-19 has served to deepen existing gender inequalities and to place women in a more vulnerable position with respect to HIV. At the same time, the options available to women to mitigate the impact have reduced. We need to ensure that future efforts to tackle HIV address these inequalities. We have reviewed the latest version of the next global AIDS strategy and are concerned that gender equality has been combined with human rights in the results area. We have therefore asked the UNAIDS Secretariat to reinstate the dedicated results area on gender equality that includes social norms change. We believe this is vital to keep the focus on gender equality in its strategy. UN Women, as a committed UNAIDS co-sponsor, also has to ensure their work on HIV and AIDS is mainstreamed properly in their own strategic plan as an important aspect of Leave No One Behind. At the same time, we need renewed engagement of all the co-sponsors and their partners and the right architecture in place to deliver on the ambitions of the new strategy. We welcome the revised guiding principles of the co-sponsors as well as the upcoming revised accountability framework as helpful foundations for future strategic engagement. As in other executive boards and in the PCB, we continue to stress the importance of sexual and reproductive rights, health and rights. The shocking statistic that adolescent girls and young women in high burden countries are twice as likely as boys and men their own age to acquire HIV underscores the importance of addressing the social and structural barriers that are often the cause, including gender-based violence and human rights violations. At the same time, as we have previously highlighted, it is important that all persons have access to sexual and reproductive health services and that all young people receive comprehensive sexuality education. The fact that only 1/3 of adolescent girls and women have comprehensive HIV knowledge is a plain reminder of the need to prioritize this area of support. There is also a need for better integration of HIV prevention and care and sexual and reproductive health services to prevent sexual transmission of HIV and prevent unintended pregnancy. Increasing choice and access to a broad family planning method mix remains critical. We agree that ensuring girls and young women have a strong voice and participate in the design of responses that are aimed at them. This is critical to ensure that they can fully and equally realise and demand the fulfilment of their rights. In closing, we look forward to the high-level meeting on AIDS later this year, which we hope will secure broad participation, including from civil society. We look forward to working with our colleagues on this board and the UNAIDS Programme Coordinating Board to achieve our collective ambition to end AIDS as a public health threat by 2030, in line with achieving universal health coverage. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I thank the distinguished delegate from the United Kingdom for her comment. And look, anyone else?
No, Mr. President, I don't see any hands up right now.
Well, I pass on to the Secretariat. You have the floor. Jean-Luc?
Maybe Osa, who would like to run? Thank you. No? Oh, okay. So, Executive Director?
On my part, it is to thank you, Chair, to thank the distinguished UK delegate and the 21 member states for the points they have raised, all of which I fully agree with, particularly the bit about strengthening the strategy with a standalone area on gender equality and women's rights and cutting it across and ensuring resources go to that. Absolutely. And your messaging on sexual and reproductive health services, integrating them with HIV services and making them available to girls and young women in all their diversity. Couldn't agree with you more. We are strengthening the strategy in those respects and hope to work with all of you on building a results framework and a structure that's also aligned to our new strategy. I thank you so much, Chair.
Mr. President.
Thank you. And I give the floor to the distinguished Russian.
Yes.
Yes. Distinguished delegate of the Russian Federation.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. And sorry, I don't know if it's a technical issue from my side. I tried to raise my hand, but maybe I failed to do so. But I will be very brief. First of all, I would like to thank UNAIDS and UN Women for the briefing. I actually wasn't going to take the floor, but as I did so, first of all, it was really useful to hear all the updates on the actions on the ground and the difficulties faced also due to the coronavirus disease. But basically the reason why I wanted to take the floor is that this summer we are looking forward for the high-level meeting on HIV and AIDS and hopefully the political declaration. And also bearing in mind that we use the contribution of the UN system when working on the outcome documents and when preparing our statements and engagement within the high-level meeting, we are very much concerned by the terminology used just now. And it's actually puzzling because we have General Assembly resolutions and other outcome documents on HIV and AIDS, which have been intergovernmentally agreed and supported. That is why for us, it's not clear why that terminology is not being used and being replaced by the controversial terminology on which delegations have either reservations or some difficulties in interpretation, or some are actually the red lines. I don't want to pick up each and every of the terms used in these two briefings and presentations. I would just encourage the UN system to use the intergovernmentally agreed terms and avoid the ones, I would just need to list some of them, which are very problematic, such as SRHR, CSE, LGBT issues, human rights defenders, and etc. And again, we are grateful for the contribution and efforts of the UN system. However, this terminology cannot serve as a basis for our discussions within the high-level meeting, including while negotiating the political declaration. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished delegates from the Russian Federation for her comment. Jean-Luc, do we have any more hands raised?
No, Mr. President, no more hands raised.
Okay. You have the floor, Jean-Luc, before we
close. Thank you, Mr. President. I just want to give an update on the draft decision 2021/1. As you may recall, I mentioned this morning that we had a silence procedure on this decision until noon. So it's passed now. I have checked with my team and my inbox, and we haven't received any indication that the silence procedure was broken. Therefore, I'm glad to confirm that during the lunchtime, we will not have to resume for the negotiation around that decision, and we will therefore, if with your permission, Mr. President, resume the regular session at 3 p.m. this afternoon. I thank you.
Thank you. We will resume at 3 p.m. with a continuation of the first plenary meeting, where the board shall be presented with item number 3. I thank you. And I'll see you at 3 p.m.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much.
Welcome.